Hey guys, welcome to Green Bean Fiction. So in today's video we are gonna see, what if Deku's heroism made girls fall for him? Part 1. Before starting, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe if you are interested in MHA fanfictions. This story is Un Ninja Entre Heroes, Dulce Venganza, by Alexander Crespo Zero. Now without wasting any more time, let's dive in. Everything had been proceeding seemingly in a normal way. That world of heroes wasn't affected by recent events, but they still had the excitement of that sports festival to keep them happy and carefree, at least for a while, because they couldn't imagine what was about to happen. An event that would completely change the world of heroes and, if that weren't enough, would bring major problems and solutions to the most famous institute of all when it comes to training and guiding future heroes, UA. In that academy was our protagonist, a boy with green hair and freckles on his cheeks, exactly 4 on each side, making a kind of rhombus on them. His height did not exceed 1.65, but said height was not an impediment for him to be considered one of the strongest in his class, 1A. That class where clear prospects for future heroes were found, as was the case of Todoroki Shoto, son of Endeavor, the number 2 hero in second place in the sports festival, while on the other hand there was the winner of the sports festival, the one who obtained the first place, Katsuki Bakugo. Both were great students when it came to the future, due to having previously demonstrated their abilities in a clear and impressive way during the sports festival, but one of their main problems was that problematic aptitude and behavior of each one. While Katsuki Bakugo was someone erratic, unable to control himself, having very violent and aggressive tendencies. Todoroki Shoto was the complete opposite of this, being a quiet and reserved boy in many aspects, having a change when putting on the hero suit, since by doing so he became a somewhat clearer and more forceful person, unlike when he didn't wear it, when he just remains quiet, without giving any opinion on anything that is not his business. However, unlike those who had obtained important positions in the sports festival, it was that green-haired boy who was just then chatting with his classmates while his teachers insisted that he pay attention to an announcement they were about to make. That aforementioned was a calmer, quieter and much more focused boy than the previous two, having the clearest and most forceful goal one could think of, to become the symbol of peace like his idol All Might. And how could he not have that goal? How could he not want to fulfill it? If the boy in question had been chosen by his idol to be the bearer of a great and important 𝐶𝐽 like the one who possessed the current symbol of peace. This power was known as one for all. It was not strange to imagine that a gift like that was destined for someone with a great future, but if that was the case, why did that boy have it? Despite not being exactly the weakest, he had nothing excessively relevant. If they saw him on the street, they could only say that he was just another boy, someone somewhat trained, perhaps in the best of cases a possible hero, but nothing more beyond that. So why did he have such a gift? To tell that story, we would have to go back a long time. But clearly we won't do that, at least not in detail. That 𝐶𝐽 had been handed over to him by his hero because he acted as every hero should, risking his life to save his friend who happened to be that boy with an explosive and volatile character. Despite not having any gift, that green-haired boy threw himself into the jaws of the wolf in order to save his friend who was being attacked by a villain who was free because of him. Arisha que estabas pidiendo ayuda. After these events and after the symbol of peace intervened, Izuku Midoriya was given the power of the symbol of peace, giving him the opportunity to be the next symbol for humanity, the one who would be the strongest pillar of society, the next symbol of peace. Our protagonist had trained hard to achieve the physical requirements necessary to control such an overwhelming and imposing power, but despite all his efforts, he was only able to receive it, since during his entrance exam to the UA Academy the aforementioned ended up almost breaking every bone in his body, with a good reason undoubtedly, saving someone who needed his help since she had been trapped under a pile of rubble due to the destruction of a giant robot. Smash. Despite being a valid and noble reason, it did not take away the fact that he was later on the verge of dying if it were not for the girl he saved intervening to prevent it from happening, and it also happened that the girl he had helped or saved was the same one who had supported him when he was about to enter the academy in question, due to which he had clumsily almost hit his face on the ground after tripping. However, that brown-haired girl named Uraraka, a girl with a somewhat chubby face and a kind of pads on the tips of her fingers, had been the one who helped him using a gift called zero gravity. A gift that allowed her to remove gravity from objects or people, something undoubtedly quite useful. After helping the green-haired boy so that he wouldn't lose his beautiful face because of a good blow, He ended up saying goodbye without allowing him to thank him, but after everything unfolded in a certain way, they had ended up in one way or another being involved in the incident with the giant robot of 0 points. An opponent that was imposing for many, but defeated with a good blow by Izuku Midoriya in exchange for the integrity of his arm and legs. After such an event and being very afraid because he believed he would not enter the UA for not having obtained points, fortunately he managed to enter and was also informed that he had achieved it thanks to the so-called rescue points. Points that he obtained after saving that defenseless girl from the giant robot. Izuku Midoriya was also able to view a video in which the girl in question asked a teacher to give her some of the points she had earned to the green-haired boy for being the one who had saved her. However, he was informed that this would not be necessary. Fortunately, in addition, said girl also managed to enter the UA with our protagonist. Many more events took place later, from a first surprise exam where our protagonist devised a way to not break his arm with a simple task like throwing a baseball, to an attack that was provoked by the self-named League of Villains, who had affected the integrity and had put in doubt the security of the largest institute of heroes in the entire world. _ Us somos la Liga de Villanos _ To calm the waters and calm the criticism from the media, as well as society as a whole, they managed to hold the sports festival, to demonstrate to society and the villains that their attack had not managed to affect them in any way. During this festival, many events took place, from a race won by our beloved protagonist to a horseback battle, although in reality the horses were his teammates. A pitched battle where the most juicy target of all was Izuku, nicknamed Deku by his rival, Bakugo Katsuki. Midoriya had ended up being the center of attention due to the large number of points he gave to whoever managed to steal his band. Fortunately, despite everything and the fact that they managed to steal his bandana, Deku's team miraculously managed to pass with bandanas that Tokiyami, one of Izuku's teammates, who possessed a peculiar shadow gift, had obtained. Once in the next phase, the most complicated and impressive fights that could be developed began, with impressive peculiarities, from a boy capable of brainwashing just by being answered, to an epic and large-scale battle of the boy Todoroki against Izuku Midoriya, where the latter basically broke every bone in his body except for his legs fortunately and his spine, otherwise he would be a very imbecile invalid. _SVAIIE _ However, few could notice that during that last fight of the green-haired man, a girl with purple hair with some kind of plus or connectors instead of ears or something similar had been shouting in support during the last attack of our protagonist in the direction of his opponent. The reason was not entirely clear, but fortunately for her, since she had noticed that said action would be seen as something more. No one noticed it, only the author of said scream, who after giving him her support in such a way, decided to go visit him in the infirmary where she would wait for him to come out, or that was her original plan, but when she saw some people heading towards her she had to completely dissemble and withdraw as a precaution, not wanting to be clearly seen while she was rambling about why she had gone to the room where our protagonist was recovering. At that point, although many didn't know it, something very important had arisen and that would end up giving Izuku Midoriya some problems, although greater pleasures in the future, not so far away, but that would be one of the greatest points of support that he would have once life hit him the way it was about to, without any kind of mercy or regret. It would simply happen, without anyone being able to stop it. A long time after all the above, the boys were waiting patiently in their classroom while the teacher gave them important news. The next day they would go to camp, but it would not be just any camp. Said camp would not only mark a before and after for the U and the entire society, but it would be the point at which, after returning from it, Deku, the next symbol of peace, would stop having that possibility in the future, to become something more, all due to events that he could not control in any way. Before leaving, it was necessary for our protagonist to ask his beloved mother to sign the permission to be able to attend. Something that his mother did without complaint, but being certainly worried about what could happen, almost as if having that clear feeling that something bad was going to happen. If only 𝐴𝐼𝐴 Midoriya, Izuku's mother, had been firm enough to listen to her senses and deny her son from participating in said trip, everything would have been very different, but at the same time, maybe, just maybe, it would have been the best for the green-haired boy. Almost as an omen of what was to come, before leaving for that camp with companions, Izuku decided to go out to buy some things, heading towards the shopping center, a place where, without realizing it, some figures were about to carry out a plan that would be the beginning of the torture of Izuku Midoriya. The green-haired boy had been left alone when looking for the necessary things for his trip, because all his companions had apparently separated to go to different places, without realizing that this would be a big problem for Deku, who could not realize or act before he was taken by the neck by 4 fingers of a strange hand, extremely cold and almost lifeless, its texture being somewhat terrifying. Our protagonist had, without realizing it, a direct encounter with death, a subject who participated in the attack of the League of Villains, being none other than Shigaraki Tamura, a villain with the ability to deteriorate almost instantly everything he touched with the 5 fingers of either of his hands. In this way he managed to defeat any kind of opponent he had in front of him. Unaware of what his true intentions were, said villain camouflaged with a black coat but his face being visible from the position of a certain companion of his who was doing his part of the plan, interrogated the young Midoriya, asking him trivial questions to which the latter responded with a certain regret in his voice, clearly afraid, but not for himself, but for all the civilians and even his companions. Fortunately for him, the villain gave up any crazy murder attempt and released our protagonist to retreat, but not before telling him that if he followed or pursued him, or even if he told anyone what had happened that day, he would be the one to personally murder everyone who knew, even his beloved mother. Due to such a threat, the future symbol of peace had no choice but to be disturbed and keep what had happened to himself. Without telling anyone at all, something that, without knowing it, would cost him even more than simply mentioning what had happened to someone. Or that would have been totally the case if it weren't for the fact that in the middle of all the confusion, a violet-haired girl had observed how a particular individual took her companion to start walking, something that made her feel strangely uncomfortable, causing her to follow him while using the connectors she had thanks to her gift to be able to listen to every word of said conversation, noticing everything but without facing the situation because she understood how delicate it was. Despite this, she had been mentally prepared to act in case her partner Midoriya needed it. Which was not necessary, and if the girl had wanted she could have confronted our protagonist at that moment. Something she did not do because she understood how difficult everything was for the boy and that perhaps he could be being watched, causing telling him something like that she had heard everything and had found out what had happened, only added more burden to her already heavy back. She wanted to prevent the boy who had seemed so heroic from carrying much more than he could handle, even if it was for something like that. Our hero hadn't noticed the purple-haired girl's presence, preferring to keep everything that had happened to himself, although what did leave him somewhat disconcerted was the fact that his companion with great musical tastes had opted not to go shopping and instead stayed by his side. They remained in awkward silence for a long time, but the girl quickly intervened, trying to ease the mood between them, which was more uncertainty and discomfort than anything else. They were sitting together at the fountain in the mall and without either of them noticing, they began to talk. Strangely, Deku, despite always being someone shy and reserved when he wasn't wearing his suit, perhaps because of what he had just experienced, was talking relatively calmly with his partner. They talked about many things, even musical tastes where they happened to agree on several, but before it could get any further or the conversation became less superficial at first glance. The classmates of both converged in the same place at the same time as if it were a mere coincidence. All seeing a strange and peculiar scene to say the least. The quietest, most serious and particular girl of all those in Class 1A was sitting in a fountain next to the shy and distracted green-haired boy who not only did not usually converse frequently with just anyone, but now he was talking completely normally with that girl with whom he had not exchanged too many words since the moment the school year began. This event left everyone stunned, especially a yellow-haired boy and a brown-haired girl who for a few seconds felt somewhat uncomfortable and restless with the scene, ending it by calling their respective companions, causing both Izuku and Jiro to turn around in a completely calm manner, although on the part of the rocker it could be seen how she had a certain expression of annoyance at knowing who had just interrupted them. On one hand, there was what for her was the greatest threat to her intentions, even if they were not entirely clear, Uraraka Ochako, the girl with whom Midoriya conversed almost constantly, but did not seem to have any kind of relevant closeness. However, on the other side was the annoying Denki Kaminaria, the second most perverted boy in her entire classroom, who for some strange reason always tried to flirt with her and ask her out, something that she always ended up rejecting almost immediately. That's why her expression of disgust was present, but when she knew who they were accompanied by, it quickly changed to one of indifference, that expression that characterized her. In this way she managed to divert the possible hasty conclusions of her companion who was with Uraraka Ochako and Mina Ashido, who was it. Nothing more and nothing less than the beautiful and wealthy Momo Yaoyorozu. After that event and after what happened with both Izuku and Jiro went unnoticed due to a vague explanation from Jiro who made them understand that she had ended up meeting Midoriya by mere coincidence and having nothing else to do, they ended up talking. Everything that had happened went into the background and each one went to their respective residence to meet at the institute the next day, the place where they would begin their excursion or camping trip. Since they would be picked up by a bus where after being taken by the latter they went directly to the meeting place where they would be received by the Pussycats heroes, giving rise to their first great challenge after being stopped in the middle of the road and after being told where they should go to continue with the camp. All members of Class 1A were thrown off the road into the forest. Just at that moment, the elaborate training plan for the heroes at that camp clearly began. It would be the worst of all for one of the students, who, after various events, would end up praying he had never attended the camp. Everything had just begun that day, something that was more than clear just by observing how the students of the 𝐬𝐴 institute belonging to the 1A course were falling down the slope of the mountainous terrain full of trees in which the road where they had been on their bus until a few minutes ago was located. However, now they were falling a few meters from the ground due to one of the heroes who had used his quirk to throw them into the forest, not without first specifying where they should go and what they would do once they arrived. They had all watched the situation in bewilderment, having no idea what was about to happen to them, and before they knew it, they were falling, thanks to that gift that had unexpectedly thrown them with a movement or shifting of the ground. They were all falling clumsily and unexpectedly, but several of the aspiring heroes possessed the reflexes necessary to act in time with great speed and precision. The first of them was Todoroki Shoto, the boy with the gift of fire and ice, who, making use of his ice side, made a descending ramp for himself with great precision, thus managing to reach the ground safely. On the other hand was Katsuki Bakugo. That ashen-haired boy had made use of his gift to create explosions with the use of his sweat. In this way he repeatedly formed explosions in both palms of his hands to reach the ground with total normality, but not leaving aside his annoying and explosive aptitude as well as his gift, making different screams as a sign of evident disagreement with the way in which he had been thrown into the forest with a lot of extras. Last but not least, Izuku Midoriya managed to act in time thanks to his great reflexes and intellect. He calculated where he would fall, knowing that due to the distance and everything that the fall entailed, something as simple as hitting the ground would not harm anyone, therefore he would not have to use his quirk, or so he thought, until something out of place caught his attention, causing him to act with great intensity and precision accordingly. His body moved completely on its own. Like that time he saved his classmate Katsuki and his best friend Uraraka Ochako from danger during the high school entrance exam. Making use of the one for all, at a percentage similar to 4% and applying it only to his left leg, he used his closest surface, the mountainside, to head forward with great momentum, flexing said leg enough to take force from the ground and perform a jump with enough intensity to create an air wave due to his great speed and momentum, which by the green-haired boy's calculations they managed to greatly stop the fall of the rest of his companions, causing them to touch the ground more easily, almost all of them falling on their feet, but this was only a side effect. Izuku's true objective was the person who was in danger due to chance. Having made use of his gift, he managed to intercept the fall of that girl with great precision, because before noticing how she was falling, he was able to analyze and notice the trajectory of her fall with relative ease, realizing not only the risk but the possible dangers she would face if when intercepting her during her fall he did it in a bad way. The aforementioned managed to grab the girl and then hit several trees and branches that were in the middle of her fall, and to finish it off, hit her back against the trunk of the last tree against which she impacted, ending her apparent trajectory, but still missing the hit that would hit the ground when she fell from exactly 15 meters high. That impact against the ground was not long in coming, much less the loud noise it caused, causing some of her companions, upon noticing what had happened, to only wonder what had caused such an impact, since some dust and debris had even been raised by such a fall. After a few seconds the girl in our protagonist's arms opened her eyelids. Having closed them, knowing what her painful fate was going to be due to the way she was falling and the direction of her fall, being extremely surprised to notice that she had no wounds whatsoever, and as if that were not enough she was surrounded by something warm. Too much to tell the truth, for a few moments she ignored everything and wished to be a little closer to that comforting warmth, not realizing until afterwards that the person who surrounded her with his arms spoke to her. Izuku =Are you okay, Kyoka? That was a hard fall, even if I positioned my body in such a way that you wouldn't receive any damage, it's very likely that you have some injuries. How are you feeling? The nervous green-haired man quickly asked, ignoring the fact that Jiro was still on top of him. He was only worried about what had happened and the possible damage it could cause. Jiro equals I'm sorry Izuku, it wasn't my intention to stay on top of you, I assure you that it was totally unintentional, I think I have some pain in my back, but, that's all. The rocker responded quickly after her initial bewilderment. She had been helped by Izuku, but she didn't understand exactly everything that had happened, only the fact that she was on top of him, so she recovered and got up from him as quickly as she could. Izuku equals why you don't have to worry. I was just trying to help you to avoid any serious injuries, that was a dangerous fall, are you sure you're okay? The aforementioned was still nervous about the state of the violet-haired girl, without giving too much importance to the fact that he was talking almost normally with a girl, perhaps due to the intensity of the moment or because his alter ego was acting now. Jiro equals you shouldn't worry, I'm really fine, thanks to you. I appreciated Midoriya, and I assure you that I'm not hurt in any way, I'm just a little disheveled, that's all. You on the other hand, you look quite beaten and bruised, even your clothes are quite torn, are you okay? Now it was the rocker who was worried about the other side. He had helped her in such a way that it was easy to see the fact that he had taken all the damage for her, that wasn't something she could just let go. If she had any serious injuries, she wouldn't be able to rest easy with herself. Izuku equals that, it's nothing, just a few small scratches, I'm sure I'll be fine soon. You shouldn't worry, or be thankful, helping is what a hero does. I'm glad you're okay, now come on, we need to move forward, if I remember correctly this is a kind of initial test until we get to camp. The aforementioned mentioned without giving importance to the obvious wounds he had, but they were less important to him, he had helped someone and that was enough for the future symbol of peace. At that moment, as if it were something completely predetermined in the green-haired boy's brain, a bright smile appeared, filling the opponent with tranquility and admiration, who observed with some constancy that smile that our protagonist had always shown. The first time he saw it was during the events of the attack of the League of Villains, then during the fight against Todoroki in the tournament, even in his fight against Katsuki Bakugo. She didn't know how to explain it, but that smile he had made her feel so protected in a way she hadn't experienced before the first time she noticed that smile, but now it was different, it was directed towards her, that made something inside her go numb, even causing a slight blush on her cheeks, something that was totally strange and very unusual in the girl in question who quickly, because she understood that she had been staring at Midoriya's face for many seconds, decided to look away, also hiding the blush on her cheeks. Izuku had helped Jiro, who by chance of life and fate had found himself in a dangerous situation. This was because the trajectory of his fall, unlike the rest of his companions, was a little further away, causing him to have as a future collision destination one of the trees that was in that forest closest to his position. The blow itself would not be the problem, but the fall as such. If it were only the direct fall like the rest, it would be a simple matter. Having so many branches to hit against and different ways to hurt yourself with them, you could end up with some broken bones and strong blows to your body, that in an intermediate case, in the worst case, some branch could end up going through your skin causing serious damage. Fortunately you managed to act in time by placing your body as a protector, covering it with it and turning your back to the objects against which you ended up impacting, receiving all the damage in that situation. Achieving his goal as a reward, supporting his partner and preventing her from receiving any harm, which not only demonstrated the commitment he had towards his duty to save people from danger, but also the enormous sense of camaraderie and putting someone else's well-being before his own. That had been a great and beautiful gesture, and as a collateral and premeditated fact, he had helped his other companions avoid taking a strong blow to the ground thanks to the air wave he had created when moving to support Jiro. However, no one besides Jiro, himself, and a certain pink-skinned girl had noticed this, not even the fact that his companion had been in danger just a few seconds ago. Kyoko was somewhat sorry for what had happened. She felt bad that someone had had to save her from that dangerous situation, but at the same time she was happy for some reason that she didn't know that it was Midoriya who had supported her at that moment, putting his own integrity at risk to achieve it. For her he was someone surprising in every sense of the word. The whole event in question quickly fell by the wayside for the few who noticed it, as some sort of mud or earth monsters appeared in the forest, making it clear to everyone present that the first test had just begun. 15 minutes later, the group had separated immediately the monsters appeared. The entire room was divided into groups. In this way they began to deal with the creatures that they had in front of them. Bakugo and Todoroki on their side doing their thing. Great shows of display of power on a large scale, demonstrating their apparent superiority over any monster that will be presented to them along the way. The rest of their companions barely managed, facing again and again creatures that apparently went with everything to defeat them, not knowing if they were created by the heroes of before who called themselves pussycats or if it was something more. But quickly when things began to get difficult, a bright light appeared in the middle of the forest, a clear reference to what was about to happen. Before anyone could act, it was seen how the trees near the light were quickly left without leaves, some without branches, but this was due to the great shock wave that had taken place in that forest, one so strong and devastating that it sent both the members of Class 1A and the monsters quite far away. However, the monsters, being closer to what happened, paid the highest price, seeing themselves all destroyed at the moment when the wave in question hit them and made them retreat enough to make them disappear, leaving nothing but land in several sectors while everyone wondered what exactly had just happened. The surprise of all the members of the class was enormous when they arrived at the place and saw an unconscious Midoriya lying on the lap of a calm Jiro who seemed to only observe peacefully as the boy was in such a calm position, resting without avoiding wondering, why the hell was he so cute? Due to her own inner thoughts and the fact that she was the only one conscious of what had just happened, she failed to notice how her classmates came close enough until they were basically surrounding the boys in question, wondering what kind of scene they were witnessing. Although for some things went further as they remembered how they had been caught being quite friendly at the mall fountain where they were alone chatting amicably sitting next to each other. Inevitably, doubts arose for those who remembered that scene, discomfort again for two individuals, Kaminari and Uraraka, who continued to watch that scene with reluctance and a certain anger in the eyes of one of them. Jiro left her fantasy world where for some reason she was talking warmly with the green-haired man, to direct her gaze to the front and witness how her companions observed what was happening. Kyoka quickly removed her hand from the green-haired boy's hair, which she had been stroking since the moment he entered her world of thoughts. She couldn't deny that it was quite fluffy and silky, and when she stroked it, it looked like a tender kitten snuggling up to its owner. Before she could explain what was happening, a blush, this time lighter, appeared on her cheeks, which further baffled everyone. Some completely misinterpreting the scene, but fortunately a couple of words were given to the situation. Words from the class president and friend of Kyoka, Jiro, evidently came out perfectly in her defense, completely diverting attention from the situation and how close that pair apparently were being. Although one of them was still unconscious or simply resting, he would not know how to answer due to his condition. Despite this, a clear smile of satisfaction could be noticed on his face, as if he enjoyed those caresses to his hair. Yaoyorozu equals wow. I didn't expect an explosion coming from this place to cause such destruction, let alone on such a large scale. Jiro, do you have any idea what exactly caused it? The black-haired girl asked, causing everyone present, except for one girl with a peculiar skin color, to completely deviate from the topic and feel doubtful about what had just happened. To be more exact, focused on said explosion, her plan worked. Jiro equals huh. Ah, yes, the explosion. It will be a little difficult for you to believe me, but it was all thanks to the precise instructions of Midoriya, who for some reason only mentioned that I should close my eyes and cover my ears. After that I could only feel the ground shaking and a strong breeze moving my hair, but nothing else from there. When I opened my eyes after a few seconds, I noticed that Izuku was approaching me and falling unconscious. Fortunately I caught him in time. The violet-haired girl muttered, who at first didn't understand what her best friend was trying to get, but when she realized it, she told the best she could what had happened in order to divert everyone's attention from the situation and explain the compromising way in which they were found. If she had said that they were a couple, it would have been much less credible than the excuse she had just given them, managing to completely mitigate their curiosity about the closeness of both, but awakening an even greater curiosity, what exactly had happened. 10 minutes before, the situation was quite complicated. The green-haired boy was fighting with mud creatures using 5% of his power. Although it was too exhausting, He managed to move well enough to deal with the creatures in front of him. Not completely, but the beasts that remained alive or mobile after the attack of the aforementioned were quickly defeated by sonic waves caused by 𝐧𝐢𝐧𝐽𝐸, who watched impressed as the boy in front of her was fighting without fracturing any part of his body or breaking any bones. It was something wonderful for her to observe. From the moment she saw him fight at the festival, she was worried in every sense of the word about the fact that Izuku Midoriya was always getting hurt, always in constant danger, since after helping someone the chances of continuing were slim if you broke a bone or a limb. For many it was extreme and exaggerated, but for Jiro it was nothing more than proof of his clear and determined conviction, proof that no matter what he wanted to achieve his goal. However, that didn't mean that she didn't worry every time he hurt himself to achieve his goal. Something that she herself didn't understand why it worried him so much, even to the point that on many occasions she asked him during physical tests if he was okay or had some kind of injury. Although she did it in her own way, it had been evident enough for a certain girl who only watched closely. In the midst of that moment, watching him fight without getting hurt, how he defeated every obstacle that stood in his way to his goal, I couldn't help but feel relieved and at the same time happy to know that I wouldn't see him get seriously hurt again. A few seconds later, Midoriya, understanding that the creatures would not stop appearing and that his companions would be in a similar or more complicated situation, decided to make a risky move, but after carefully analyzing the structure of the creatures and their resistance, it would be the best way to deal with those opponents, the best way to protect Jiro. Izuku quickly spoke to her, ordering her to cover her ears and jacks, which she managed to insert them herself, although it felt a little pain when doing so, but that way she would avoid something worse from what the boy was about to do. Once she was behind him and secure enough, the young shonen only had to prepare himself, this time using 10% in both hands to clap with great force in such a way that that large and powerful air wave was generated, even to the point that some trees were just inches from being uprooted. The attack fortunately managed to destroy all of his opponents and was not wide enough to hurt his teammates, whom he had located thanks to his partner's jacks, although he had done this before. Once after giving that great applause, the bearer of One for All felt exhausted. He had used One for All for quite some time without resting, and that last movement had exhausted his reserves, also causing his companions to come towards his position due to the greenish flash that had caused the union of both palms to give such applause. The ground that was beneath him and around him was in quite bad condition, implying the force of the action, but luckily for Jiro, everything behind him was fine. The young aspiring hero had made full use of his power to finish off the enemies, but he made the necessary calculations to prevent such an attack from endangering his partner in any way. For some reason, he cared much more about her than the rest of his companions, but that feeling was stuck and hidden deep inside his being, camouflaged as fellowship, and nothing more. That is why he did not realize exactly what he felt or what was driving him to act that way. He cared about her. He had been worrying a lot about him since the festival. It was his way of thanking her for always looking out for him, although he didn't know why, but her pleasant company and closeness that no one had noticed had given him greater confidence when talking to her, to the point of not even stuttering. After what he had done, he approached the warm figure in front of him, a figure that slowly became a silhouette, giving the person in front of him one last smile before collapsing completely, only to be caught by a nimble Jiro who noticed him in time. His gesture had been extremely meaningful, and she saw it as a rather kind way of telling him that she cared. After what had happened, his companions approached them, and everything unfolded in the situation they were now facing. Present, they had already finished off the creatures. Mostly thanks to Midoriya, although all the members of his class couldn't help but wonder what exactly he had done and how he had managed to do it. Since it was evident how exhausted he was by the simple fact that he hadn't woken up yet and was being carried on a stretcher made by Momo, being pushed by Uraraka, who had offered to do it long before Jiro could even act, although the latter was still close enough to that pair to carefully analyze Uraraka, who only seemed focused on someone in front of them. Is he watching who's in front of him? Even when he's carrying an unconscious Izuku in his upper clothes so worn out that it's possible to see his sculpted abdomen if you look closely enough. Those were the thoughts of a frustrated Kyoka who, despite not being aware of what was being thought, couldn't help but play with her jacks with some annoyance. That chubby daredevil had taken away her opportunity to be with Izuku when he woke up, and everything happened as she watched. Who was in front of him? After a few minutes of walking and many merely chatting about trivial matters, they ended up arriving at the camp without even having passed 2 hours, which surprised everyone present, since in their opinion, at least in the opinion of the heroes, that they had been able to deal with their obstacles in such a way was something totally absurd and impressive. Aizawa, the teacher of that classroom in question, was about to ask how they had gotten it so quickly, but before saying anything, he noticed that Uraraka was carrying an unconscious Midoriya on a stretcher, which made him feel a little uneasy, causing him to go check him, being surprised when he only noticed that the palms of both hands were quite bruised and marked, as if he had hit something quite solid with them. Maybe he had some fractured or dislocated bones, but nothing more beyond that. Before he could ask anything, he was interrupted by Jiro, who stood next to him with the intention of explaining what had happened, which left the entire class bewildered. But the situation only got worse when Midoriya suddenly woke up performing an action that would leave everyone completely blank, more the members of the class than the teacher himself, although he would also be somewhat bewildered by what was about to happen. Quickly the green-haired boy opened his eyes and noticed the blue sky. He was about to yawn, but before doing so he remembered in what situation he had ended up falling unconscious, causing him to worry greatly for his partner. So instinctively and without being able to control it, he sat down on the stretcher to give a loud scream. Jiro, are you okay, Jiro? A fairly clear silence was present in the place where all the members of Class 1A were. Everyone was quite quiet because of how stupefied they had been due to the scream of a certain green-haired boy who showed enormous concern for his classmate Jiro. More than for his own well-being, which gave him a lot to think about. Although some only thought it was due to that hero instinct that characterized the aforementioned, for a few others it seemed to be something more, while the vast majority simply could not think about what was really happening between that pair, since they had been seen too much together lately. It's not that it was something scandalous or too close together, but for people who normally had never had an important or relevant relationship like a friendship, it was quite unusual to see them so close together. What they didn't know was that in reality Izuku and Jiro had been talking for a long time. To be more exact, their friendship, which was quite good, extended to the beginning of classes after the entrance exam. But the reason why they were not seen together in the classroom or at school was because of how discreet they both tended to be when they saw each other, not for any apparent reason, merely to avoid inconvenience, or so Kyoka had explained to the green-haired boy, who simply nodded and decided to follow the advice that his opponent had given him. The young man was sitting on that stretcher after having screamed so loudly, and it was no wonder he couldn't concentrate properly. His vision was still somewhat out of focus and sharp because he had just gotten up after having been unconscious for at least an hour. However, that was no impediment for the boy in question to look towards where Jiro was. Without knowing who she was, but due to her figure, although his vision was still not adequately well, not even enough to recognize Professor Aizawa, who was at his side. Upon noticing her, he did not hesitate to get up from the stretcher, even though his body had cuts and some wounds, nothing serious except for his back, which seemed to have received strong blows, but nothing out of the ordinary that was alarming. Jiro was blushing. Everyone had been waiting for her reaction, while most of the students were prepared for her to stick her jack into the body of the young aspiring hero as she had done on many occasions with Kaminari. Others were simply expectant with some ideas of what could happen, but nobody expected the rocker's reaction, something as tender and at the same time feminine as blushing. Without a doubt, it left everyone bewildered, even her teacher, since he knew his students and their abilities well. Seeing the serious and serene girl blushing and not acting violently like she did with her classmate Denki, was something totally new for her and something completely strange for the rest of the students, who could do nothing but observe what was about to happen next. Jiro had no time to react or anything like that, perhaps because she was still in shock, or because of the fact that the aforementioned person in front of her was walking in her direction without the top of his shirt, since it had ended up on the floor due to the horrible state it was in, allowing his entire well-trained body to be seen. From an abdomen apparently worked for years, or that was the impression, to a strong and well-formed chest that was only accompanied by his perfectly aligned back, full of some wounds, she couldn't deny it, but God, whoever observed him, wouldn't hesitate to say that he had been sculpted by God himself. Perhaps that was the reason why she had no reaction, and why she didn't react either when the green-haired man took her by the shoulders and spoke to her with his classic smile. 𝐧𝐢𝐬𝐴, are you okay? Did I do something wrong? Did I manage to defeat the mud beasts, or was my move a mistake? Do you have any injuries? Where are the rest? How long have I been asleep? Underscore his words were spoken with some nervousness, mostly because of the guilt he felt for having fallen unconscious, leaving his partner alone and on her own, who had probably had to deal with his body being out of combat. In addition, he was very worried about what had happened to her and her companions, but for those reasons he didn't realize that he was in a very, very compromising situation. Underscore. Jiro equals. Underscore Jiro was silent for a few seconds. She didn't know how to explain what was happening. She didn't know how to act. She was totally frozen. There were so many things to take into account. His questions, his touch, his body, even if it was only his torso that was naked, it was too much to process. Moreover, she completely ignored the looks of the rest of her classmates to focus only on those emerald eyes so bright and striking to her. Underscore. Izuku equals what's wrong? Are you feeling okay? I'm sorry I suddenly fell asleep, or rather, I'm sorry I fell unconscious. I'm truly sorry. I used my power to the fullest extent of my ability, otherwise we wouldn't have made any progress. By the way, why is it so cold? Izuku had put his questions aside for the moment since he thought that, as on some previous occasions, he had ended up overwhelming his opponent with the amount of questions, so he checked to see if she was okay by observing her from top to bottom while his vision returned to normal and he felt a certain cold on his body due to the wind that was blowing. Underscore. Jiro equals. Underscore still nothing. If at that moment a notification had been heard saying, Jiro X has stopped working, everyone would surely believe it and see it as something logical, but she wasn't the only one in shock, but the rest of her class who observed not only the scene, but also the well-trained body of the green-haired boy who just continued standing there observing Kyoka's state until something interrupted everything. Underscore. Opening square bracket question mark closing square bracket. Equals damn shitty nerd, do you think you're stronger just because you have more muscles than me, trash? Exclamation mark. I'll make sure to put you in your place, you piece of shit. Shine. Underscore before anyone could react, the ashen-haired boy had lunged at the green-haired boy in anger at the boy's apparent display of superiority by walking around shirtless, but before he could reach Izuku, who by instinct had opted for a defensive position and turned his body to face Bakugo who was behind him, the teacher intervened. Underscore. Aizawa equals that's enough Bakugo. Midoriya, I don't know what happened with your clothes or with you in general, but I see that at least you didn't break your bones like during the tournament, that's something positive. Whatever happened you can tell me later, for now everyone go to the complex to continue with the information of the training plan. Oh, I almost forgot, put on some new clothes or we won't be able to continue with the tests. Underscore the teacher mentioned this last thing between yawns while he carried the blonde boy in the bandages of his suit trapped in with his quirk annulled, to the interior of the complex that he mentioned to Izuku who could only observe his naked torso with some uneasiness due to what his teacher had mentioned. Underscore. Izuku equals why couldn't the tests continue? Underscore the green-haired boy mentioned a little bewildered as he looked to the side seeing his classmates on the left side of his current position, all staring at him, but without knowing why this was the boy could only assume that it was because of the scene that 𝐴 had made. Therefore he only blushed a little at the scene he made and went to Jiro to tell him something else while he watched him. Underscore tell me how we got there later. Thank you so much for driving me, I owe you so much. I'll go change and we'll see you inside. Bye guys, see you inside. Underscore. Hiroshima equals damn, that's what it means to be a man, Midoriya. Wait for me, I'll come with you. I have to be with Baku bro when Professor Aizawa frees him and he'll start chasing you like you're a cat and he's a dog. Underscore the redhead mentioned, excited to see everything his partner had caused simply by taking off his shirt. Not even he during practice and training when he took it off was taken into account and caused such an atmosphere as the greenhead had achieved, who retreated at high speed towards the interior of the complex while being followed by his partner Hiroshima. Underscore. 3 equals who would have thought it? I never imagined that Midoriya would be hiding something like that under all those baggy clothes. He's normally the one who goes unnoticed simply because he's too reserved with his own appearance and everything in general. Mina-chan, I thought Hiroshima would be the strongest in the entire class when it came to muscles, but apparently your boyfriend lost. Underscore it was a normal comment coming from the invisible girl of the class. It was not strange at all to see her flirting with her friend Mina and sometimes Momo or Tsuyu, but the comment seemed to be massively ignored, since Tsuyu, Momo, Uraraka, Mina and Jiro continued lost in a different world. Kaminari equals it's not like it's anything impressive, even I have more muscles. Just because he has a little more abs doesn't mean he's the strongest in the room. A good shock would surely put him in his place. He mentioned the walking Pikachu in a conceited manner as he walked towards Jiro and tried to take her hand. He didn't want her to continue being dazed and blushing over something as out of place as Midoriya, who in his opinion was nothing more than a shy, unimportant boy with a relatively unimportant gift. Jiro equals. She hadn't realized that she was still static and not saying anything at all, but she was suddenly woken up when Kaminari took her hand, causing him to receive what Midoriya should have received for having been closer to her, or rather for the situation itself. After stabbing Denki with her jacks and leaving him on the ground, the rocker only moved her head from left to right, waking up in time to hide it as best as possible. It's not like it matters, the problem is that now he owes me a strong paralysis that I'll give him as soon as I see him. Are you coming, Momo? Yaoyorozu equals sure, I'll go with you. The brunette quickly mentioned to follow the violet-haired girl while trying to forget what she had just seen, unable to avoid blushing every time the image of Izuku without a shirt came to mind. His body and everything in general, even with those wounds, he looked too good to ignore. But someone like her with her position could not afford to be distracted. She quickly regained her composure as if nothing had happened. Tsuyu equals Ochako-chan, let's go inside. My legs are tired from walking so much, and I'm sure the same goes for you. We have to take advantage of as much time as possible to rest. They'll surely give us something to eat when we get in. Let's go. I mentioned the half-amphibian green-haired girl fully recovered from that event in which she had blushed enough, while she took her partner Uraravati by the left hand, taking her with her to the interior of the place in question, while Uraraka, who was being dragged, basically could not get out of her head what she had just seen. That image would not leave her for anything in the world, or so it seemed when observing her with her lost gaze and that blush on her face. 3 equals Ojiro-san. Could you help me with Denki? I don't think it's right to leave a friend on the ground, especially in the woods. Judging by the shock Kyoka gave him, it seems he won't be getting up for a while, and Mineta went after Momo muttering obscenities, clearly leaving his friend behind. The invisible girl made it clear as she pointed in the direction of the complex where a very short boy with some kind of rubber bands in his purple hair was being strangely beaten. Ojiro quickly took Kaminari, putting him on his shoulder and entering the complex with Toru, who was watching a completely paralyzed Mina, static in that place. Mina equals so you were saving that for yourself, Midoriya-kun. I can't wait to take advantage of this situation. The pink-skinned girl whispered with a somewhat sinister smile on her face as she slightly raised her phone, which she had hidden in her hair and with which she had taken a certain incriminating photo of what had happened. She wouldn't let Izuku get away with such a situation. Neither of them knew it, but that day another problem began for the life of the young aspiring hero. After our protagonist has taken care of changing and settling in again. Since he received a little help from Kirishima to clean his wounds and arrange the necessary small gauze on his body. Both headed towards the main room where the talk had started a while ago, giving the necessary instructions to everyone, even informing apparently that Class 1B has also attended the camp in order to develop in larger places and gain greater knowledge of the field, but that they had not yet introduced themselves because they have not yet completed the main test, since if they had done so they would already be present in the place where they were. In addition to informing them of an important fact, which was that on that first day they would train the development of their gifts, where they could limit each gift in such a way that it would allow them to continue improving, notice their own capabilities and problems, among other crucial points necessary to understand in order to continue with the activities and training, that camp being called the Hell Camp, or something like that. One of the group members mentioned pussycats. After Izuku's arrival to the group, many were murmuring for a few seconds. Our protagonist did not understand why, since he had completely ignored the subject, or rather he had forgotten it as his own self-defense mechanism to what had happened. What he could notice was the stinging murderous gaze fixed on the back of his neck, although when he turned to meet the person who was looking at him in such a way he could only notice a Jiro with an indifferent look looking anywhere but in his direction, something that surprised him a little, but he decided to ignore it. Everyone was about to leave when Aizawa would say something that would greatly change the course of that camp and would give special development to certain individuals, in addition to giving birth to new problematic feelings for the members of the group, but it was necessary for everything that the future was about to hold for them. A trust would be born that would be key to this. Aizawa equals since Midoriya is present, I can make an important announcement. Due to the conflicts that have developed and the fact that Izuku basically passed the first test, so to speak, a group of people who volunteer will be able to accompany him to carry out their own training. Do not worry about not being at the level of training that I will give to each of the members who do not go with Izuku. I know Midoriya well, he is someone capable of training adequately and much more thanks to his data. If no one wants to accompany him, I will choose them. There should be a total of 3 students besides Midoriya, who wants to go. The teacher mentioned apathically. He was hoping everything would be over quickly so he could tell each member of his class their duties and training, that way he could rest as he wished. Regarding Izuku, he expected no one to want to accompany him besides Iida and Uraraka, but he was greatly surprised to notice something else he hadn't expected. Professor Aizawa, rolling on the floor laughing me a punto around pushpin Aizawa-sensei, accompaniera Midoriya K. The atmosphere instantly felt strange, and it was no wonder. 2 people who shared almost nothing with Izuku had just voluntarily signed up to train with him, even though it meant not being with their usual teammates, which was quite odd, if not peculiar. One of the girls was a rocker who apparently just raised her hand and decided to go for it and nothing more. Her expression betrayed nothing but indifference, although the reality was different. On the other hand, there was an excited and happy Mina who was smiling a lot while holding her left hand up in the air, jumping around as if she were about to win the biggest prize of all, which was normal for her. But that only happened when she really had something planned or it was a rather interesting matter, otherwise she wouldn't have such an excited and joyful attitude. Despite being 2 and being so far away from each other with her respective group of friends, a tension could be noticed between them, the reason nobody wanted to find out for anything in the world. Aizawa just sighed in an exhausted way and pointed to where an impressed Izuku was. He didn't expect someone to offer so quickly, and worse yet, to train with him in a separate space apparently or in a different place. He didn't know anything about it because he had just arrived and had heard the necessary information regarding the fact that he would train with a group of people apart from the rest. The girls went towards Midoriya each in their own way. One calmly and showing indifference at all times, while inside when observing the green-haired boy she could feel a certain joy that it was him who would help her improve. While the other girl simply maintained that exciting and bubbly aptitude, even going ahead of Jiro to stand in front of Midoriya very close to his face while everyone watched what was happening with an embarrassed and blushing Izuku who couldn't say a word before her clear nervousness. He wasn't used to that kind of closeness at all, much less from someone other than Uraraka who used to do it quite a bit, and because of that he had lost some nervousness, but only a little. With this happening on one side, you could clearly hear a dwarf with purple hair or purple balls on his head taking them off and dropping them, causing blood to fall to the ground from the amount of balls he was dropping, while he seemed to mention something about Midoriya being a damn lucky guy. A confused Uraraka did not hesitate to quickly raise her hand, approaching the group to be the 3rd member. However, the most obvious reaction was that of an angry Kaminari who couldn't help but bite his lip in such a way that he even began to release some electric shocks from his hands. He was quite out of his mind, but he managed to contain himself simply because he noticed that it was the fearful Midoriya. He wouldn't try to do anything with his girl or achieve anything with her. He was just a poor shy boy, nothing to fear or worry about. With the group made up entirely of Uraraka, Jiro and Mina, Izuku had no complaints, but he could notice how most of his male classmates were looking at him as if he was being a pride for them or something similar. Except for the notorious look of superiority coming from Bakugo and Kaminari, for a moment he didn't understand why Kaminari was looking at him like that. He had never looked at him as someone who was self-centered to such an extent, but he preferred to ignore it and start heading towards the exit of the place as quickly as possible, making space between him and the rest of the girls. He had the feeling that there had to be one or his physical and mental integrity would be at enormous risk. Before leaving the complex in question, he was informed by Aizawa that his training place was located just over 2 kilometers in the west direction. It was somewhat remote, but not enough to say that it was something exaggerated, especially with the gift he possessed. The exceptions were Jiro and Uraraka, Their gifts could not be applied for a great displacement or similar, therefore he would have to move slowly enough to not leave them behind. Said and done, they left the place while their teacher took the rest of the students to another point in the complex to take them out right through the back, since that was where their training area was located, just a few meters from Class 1B. Our protagonist was about to tell the group something, but before doing so he noticed that when he turned his gaze they were all watching him as if they knew something he didn't, which made his hair stand on end. He had to get out of there as quickly as possible to get to his training place and for everyone to train in their own way, that way he wouldn't have all the attention on him. For this reason, he observed Mina for a moment and gave her the necessary instructions to continue, although his voice was somewhat faint and he barely spoke normally, thanks to the fact that he was not looking directly at Mina but instead at her peculiar hair. This made his nerves go away a little and he managed to mitigate the desire to run away from the place due to the looks of the three of them, distracting his mind. 𝐧𝐢𝐬𝐴 Mina-chan, you have mobility thanks to your acid. It is not surprising that you arrived first. I know it may sound silly, but I would like you to go ahead to take the place in question before we get lost on the way. Thanks to your acid we will be able to follow it and avoid getting lost. In addition to that way we will be able to mark the path with some destruction. Although I would like to avoid it, it is necessary to return that or use Uraraka-chan's gift to be able to elevate myself or one of us and find the place. We would use the same method to return. His ideas were clear. Normally he would be muttering for minutes, but due to the situation and the fact that he was surrounded by three girls who couldn't take their eyes off him, he wanted to get out of that scene as soon as possible, no matter how cowardly it sounded. Mina equals Midoriya-kun, I think we can move with the least destruction possible. Let's use Uraraka-chan to see where to go. It's 12 p.m. so we should return before it starts to get dark or we could really be in trouble since we wouldn't find the complex in the middle of the night. The pink-skinned girl muttered happily as she looked into the green-haired boy's eyes and got a little closer to him to the point of invading his personal space enough to make him blush clearly while his nerves began to surface again, causing some discomfort in Uraraka and some indifference in Jiro, who noticed how Uraraka touched Mina on the back and then joined her fingers on both hands and spoke. Uraraka equals of course Mina-chan. You can look for yourself where the place is and show us from up there. After you see it I will let you fall slowly. Quickly after saying that he used his quirk causing Ashido to float up away from Izuku, which bothered her a little, causing her to pout a little as she looked ahead. After watching for a few minutes she saw where the place was and informed everyone before being quickly brought down by Uraraka. After finishing identifying the location, with Mina's support, they easily reached the spot where they would train. Everyone looked around. It was quite spacious, basically a clearing in the middle of the forest, with a lake nearby and some crucial points that would help the girls train their quirks. But how would they do it? What exactly would they do? Without Aizawa, no one could tell them what to do to train. Or so they thought, until our dear protagonist took his green notebook, one that he always carried with him, and had taken it out of his bag at that moment to find out what training he could do during the camp. But now that he was on his own, he had a lot to do with the girls present, and what they didn't know was Izuku's great talent for analysis. At that time the hellish camp for the girls was just beginning with a coach who didn't know how hard he would make them work. Bueno, comenzaremos con lo esencial, les dar sus planes de entrenamiento a cada una and podremos comenzar. After a few seconds of uncertainty following the aforementioned words, the three aspiring heroes could do nothing but keep looking at what the green-haired man held in his hands. He was slightly away from them to avoid disturbing her with the obvious loud whispers, while their opponents could only watch him with different reactions. Uraraka only seemed to be impressed by the amount of murmurs he was emitting and their speed. It seemed almost like a computer compiling the information and generating something new. Mina watched Midoriya closely, or so it seemed, when the reality was that she was very attentive to the reactions of the girls behind her back, the girls that she had ended up detecting or identifying as interested in Izuku, due to different reactions and situations that she saw from both of them at the right time with Deku. On the other hand, there was the way Jiro saw Midoriya. It was noticeably different from the rest of her expressions. She seemed to be totally disinterested, just observing with a little curiosity but nothing more than that. When inside it was more than clear that she was trying to distract herself by arguing to herself that she didn't have to pay so much attention to Izuku, It was just him, nothing more, and they weren't alone, but accompanied by two girls who could come to understand everything faster than normal, at least one of them, while the other was an obstacle for 𝐾𝐽. The scene of the three girls staring at each other from moment to the next, as if each of them were analyzing their rivals with a certain amount of concern, was abruptly interrupted by the green-haired boy, who was the only one present among them all, while directing his gaze solely over the head of the tallest girl present, Mina, thus avoiding looking at the faces of the others. With this tactic, he could avoid feeling embarrassed or ashamed when speaking, at least for the most part. He had the necessary plan for the three of them, but he understood that he couldn't give everything to each of them while they were together. He supposed that some of them wanted to keep certain information a secret, since everyone present was clearly rivals when it came to that path of becoming the best hero they could. The freckled man thought carefully for a few seconds and then mentioned what he had in mind, and thus prevent any of them from hearing unnecessary information about the other. That way he could totally avoid spreading weaknesses or weak points in the person in question, because it would clearly be a great disadvantage when it came to fighting. 𝐬𝐧𝐼𝐴 I'm sorry, but I require that we separate enough. It will be in the following way. 𝐴𝐵𝐷o-chan will head to that part of the space, just next to the R rocks and the tea tree that seems extremely old. Uraraka must go towards the stream on the side that is near a kind of rock formation, and Jiro-chan can stay right here. That way we can go to a certain point to be able to help you train. I will go one by one after I finish explaining your proper training. You can begin. I mentioned calmly. The green-haired man, or the greatest calm he could muster. That was an achievement for him, being able to talk to girls with a certain normality. Mina equals huh. Why Jiro? If he's going to have your help in training, why not me, or Uraraka? Do you have some kind of preference for Jiro? She was clearly trying to annoy the green-haired boy, or rather, make him nervous, but she was focusing much more on the rocker's reaction, who seemed to have understood what she was referring to, but our protagonist intervened in time with his characteristic nervousness before 𝐾𝐽 could react in any way. 𝐬𝐧𝐼𝐴 equals wah. You're wrong 𝐴𝐵𝐷o-chan. The truth is that I only have to help Jiro because I have much more time planning his improvements and no other aspects to train than you. Wait. I didn't mean. It's that he quickly looked for a way to retract or better explain what he wanted to say, since what he had said only made him look like someone who had paid a lot of attention to Jiro during training or in general, and therefore paid more attention to his development, which was in fact the case, but he couldn't let them see him as a weirdo for it. But it was a bit late, since Mina's reaction was a tombstone for him. Mina equals oh, I understand now, that's what it was about. I never thought you two would be that close. I thought you were more into girls like Uraraka-chan or Tsuyu. You're really full of surprises. Midoriya-chan, were you Jiro keeping such a big secret from me all the time? What would Kaminari think? A sly answer and questions even more with a flirtatious and energetic tone as expected from 𝐴𝐵𝐷o, making the atmosphere even more peculiar than it was before. Deku had an expression that said, "Swallow me earth," for a particular reason, while Jiro had blushed, changing her totally expressionless or disinterested expression to a somewhat more heated one, not knowing if the reddish on her cheeks were a blush or anger. Whatever it was, her answer was not long in coming. Jiro equals wait a minute. What are you referring to? I'm not hiding anything from Midoriya. We've only talked a couple of times about how I could improve in combat, nothing more. Also, why should I care what Kaminari thinks? Those words baffled both girls, who were now completely blank. Not only had she accepted that she had spoken previously with Izuku, but she had exploded as she does when they anger her in order to defend her position as disinterested, but seeming that she was actually helping Deku to get out of the way. However, the biggest blow came when she mentioned Denki leaving the girls in front of her even more speechless. Izuku equals wait a minute. Sorry to interrupt, but why would Kaminari have anything to do with this? His way of saying that was in a somewhat shy and nervous manner. While the blush on his cheeks did not disappear, it only managed to make everyone present notice him, making the latter cover his reddish face from the looks, giving him an air of tenderness and shyness quite pleasant and attractive for a certain girl who could not help but change her expression of curiosity to one of something more interesting when she noticed that way of acting of the boy that always caught her attention. Mina equals you didn't know, Midoriya-chan. I thought Jiro-chan told you. You see, Underscore before she could say anything else she noticed how the violet-haired girl turned in her direction, glaring at her in a way she had seen her do to Kaminari before. It was her way of saying, "Today you die." Therefore, due to the nervousness of the sudden action, the animated girl only managed to say something with difficulty. It's our girl things I'm sorry mi Midoriya-chan Uraraka equals Deku-kun. I wouldn't like to be a nuisance or anything like that. I can train on my own if necessary. If you were to train with Jiro-chan, it's because you have something in mind that will help her improve, therefore she will perhaps get a little more support, but if you see it necessary, I will support you as much as possible. The chubby-faced girl had taken advantage of that situation to her apparent advantage, since with those words of encouragement she jumped right at Midoriya while she was close enough to him and looked him in the eyes. Izuku equals YSOO of course let's just give our best effort. It's too close. He thought to finish that and get far enough away from her to be able to breathe calmly and prevent the blush on his cheeks from getting even worse. They had to start training, since every second lost was a second where he didn't enter and didn't get better at controlling the one for all, and he couldn't allow himself to continue falling unconscious or losing fights because of his inability. Mina equals Ho. Who would have thought that Midoriya-chan had such a close relationship with Jiro-chan to the point of consciously supporting her more than us, and that she would end up admitting that they have previously had conversations about how to improve. That already gives a lot to think about. I can't wait to mention it to the girls. I'll interrogate her when we finish training. I always thought that she would rely on Kaminari to train and such, who would have thought? She finished excited in her thoughts while she observed those mentioned with some intrigue and mischief and then headed towards where Deku mentioned a few minutes ago. Uraraka equals since when did Jiro-chan become so close to Deku-kun? I don't remember seeing her with him at any time. Is what Jiro mentioned really true? I can't give it any more thought. I'd better go to where Deku-kun mentioned. I'll find out later when Ashido-chan questions her. The brown-haired girl thought as she left the place with some unease to head towards where Izuku mentioned, leaving Kyoka and Midoriya alone in that clearing. Jiro equals oh, damn. Midoriya doesn't help in these situations. If you just get nervous and start blushing like a tomato, you're just making them believe something that isn't true. If only you weren't so cute when you blush. Wait, what? Shaking her head from side to side to get rid of the idea she had about Izuku being cute when he was blushing, she fixed her attention on the green-haired boy who was looking her up and down, which made Jiro blush a little since she wasn't wearing the best of clothes. It was just her hero suit and that was the best for training, but not for Midoriya to observe her in such an analytical way. Would he think she was ugly? Izuku equals well, we can continue now, Jiro-chan. I'm sorry I wasn't more helpful in the previous situation, to the point that you had to say that we talked about it before. I'm sorry. The green-haired man quickly apologized, bowing slightly and then feeling his body stabbed by something, quickly realizing what it was and falling backwards due to the pulse or rather the paralysis that had been caused. Jiro equals it's great that you admit your mistake. But that doesn't mean I won't be interrogated to death tonight for your actions today in general. Don't you remember that you even left me in an even worse situation when you fell unconscious and then when you woke up it was even worse? The violet-haired girl was restless and nervous. It angered her not knowing why she behaved in such a way, why she simply could not stop hanging around with the green-haired boy and ignore everything that had happened, why it was so hard for her to ignore him or get away from him, to simply be indifferent. That had her really frustrated, and at that moment she released all that frustration on Midoriya, the cause of it all. Izuku equals I'm seriously sorry Jiro-chan. I didn't know that falling unconscious would bring you trouble, much less that waking up would cause you a problem. Really. I'm sorry. I was just worried about you. Those words escaped her lips with some regret, feeling a little bad for causing trouble to her companion and friend. The only one besides Uraraka that she could really consider a friend, and now she seemed to anger her by any trouble she caused her, time after time. Jiro equals damn, well Jiro, bother the guy who supports you and hit him because of your frustrations. That way you'll go very far. The rocker girl was mentioned to herself with evident sarcasm in every thought. She was a fool for hurting the boy who had been helping her improve and who shared tastes with her. The only boy besides Denki that she could consider trustworthy, although more than that, he seemed admirable to her and even closer than Denki was, and that made her feel worse when she thought about how he had been treating her. Jiro equals I'm really sorry Midoriya, I'm quite impulsive sometimes, you shouldn't take the time to apologize to me or anything like that, I'm just a bit violent sometimes, I guess that's why the vast majority think that when I approach them it's to hit them or treat them badly. She tried to speak as normally as possible, but in a certain way she felt depressed, not because of what she had mentioned, but because she knew that with her attitude she could manage to push Izuku away from her. Izuku equals huh. That's not true Jiro-chan. You are someone incredible, quite serious on many occasions, because you know when the situation warrants it, but that does not mean that you are bad or violent. In some cases you can even use force, however it is never with bad intentions and I understand that perfectly. Come on. You should not get discouraged, I'm fine. Just look at me, remember something, people who smile are the strongest. Those words seemed normal or without much importance, but they were what Kyoka needed and even more. That smile was present on the face of a happy Midoriya who sought to make his partner happy. After a few seconds he decided to go to the others to explain his training and then he would return, so he quickly said goodbye to Jiro and told her to wait for him, that he would return in a few minutes. Our dear Jiro was lost in her thoughts, she couldn't believe that such an insignificant smile, such inconsequential words and such unimportant actions could have such an impact on her. Could make her feel that way, she couldn't understand it. And she feared it in a certain way, she had never felt that way. And she had been that way for a few days, although she could say that it all started the day she saw that beautiful smile in front of her while she helped her face villains in the rescue field during the League attack, and on many more occasions. Who could imagine that she, such a serious girl and at the same time closed off to the vast majority of people, could come to have that kind of feeling of dependence in a certain way on the clumsy and shy boy in the class. Midoriya left his companion there to head towards the first meeting point, Uraraka, his closest companion and for whom, although he didn't know exactly how, he felt something he couldn't identify or differentiate from the rest of his emotions, capable of accelerating his pulse just by getting close to her. She was a user of gravity or a gift that allowed her to control it to the point of slowing or nullifying it, but couldn't you try to do something else with that gift? Midoriya, being with his first and only best friend, did not forget to leave some distance between them to prevent her from getting too close. After that he took out his notes and began to give her his training plan. Izuku equals DOK or Uraraka-chan, your training plan is as follows. Based on your physical build and abilities, learning hand-to-hand combat is crucial and very important for you, so to restore your physical condition you will be in charge of jogging for 1 hour and performing 200 squats in repetitions of 4 and 100 sit-ups in repetitions of 3. After you finish with that you will begin to train your quirk. Since it is based on nullifying gravity in a percentage way, then you will be given the task of trying to nullify gravity in the water without it separating and beginning to go in all directions or being divided like drops. In this way you will be practicing the control of your gift. Let's see how you progress over time. When all this is not enough because you feel that you achieved your goal, let me know. That would be all. Do your best Uraraka-chan. Lastly, the green-haired man mentioned stretching his left fist towards the opposite side so that she would respond to the greeting, which she did with a huge smile and bumped her fist. That kind of contact was enough to make Izuku's heart rate shoot up. Uraraka equals let's do our best Deku-kun. Thank you for the support in the training plan, I will do my best to not fall behind you and Iida-senpai. The brown-haired girl assured with conviction while her eyes shone with determination. She wasn't going to let her companions get ahead of her, especially a certain blue-haired man. Izuku equals Iida-senpai. In a certain way, thinking about what Uraraka had mentioned made him feel a touch of discomfort. No, it was something clearer and less understandable at least for him, so he decided to ignore it and withdraw with a half-smile, now heading towards his companion Ashido who was in the right place examining the tree in front of her. The other side carefully observed the tree while her mind was lost for a few moments thinking about her own issues such as, how would I interrogate Jiro? What would I answer? Would I be able to get anything of value out of her? There was too much to take into account, but what she wouldn't take into consideration while she was thinking in such a way immersed in her own questions and so on, was the fact that our protagonist would carelessly approach her and touch her right shoulder with his right hand to try to wake her up, causing her to react in such a way that she would scream in fright while saying the words. "I'm not sure I'll save the photo of Midoriya-chan shirtless, don't kill me Jiro-chan." Moments of silence between them. On one hand Ashido didn't want to say anything. For the first time she was genuinely embarrassed, not knowing that she had said that out of her mind until she noticed the blush on Izuku's cheeks growing noticeably. On the other hand Deku could only feel embarrassed and couldn't help but wonder, would it be true? And if so, when did he do it? The doubt disappeared as soon as it appeared, leaving a boy with emerald eyes carefully observing his companion's blush, which was not too evident due to her skin color, but despite that, he could notice it with a certain tenderness. It was strange to see her shy or embarrassed, very unusual. In a matter of seconds, the tense atmosphere disappeared with a slight laugh from the green-haired man, who apparently hadn't been able to bear the scene, not because of discomfort, but because of the fact that she really was being shy, even if it was only for that moment. It was something that didn't happen all the time, she had to take it into account. Mina, faced with the small laugh from her opponent, didn't hesitate to question him with some discomfort, as if she felt he was making fun of her. "Mina equals Midoriya-chan. May I know exactly what you're laughing at? Didn't your mother teach you that scaring a lady is not correct, nor is it gentlemanly, much less making fun of one after scaring her?" She tried to make the green-haired boy feel a little bad since she was somewhat upset thinking that he was making fun of her, although technically if you analyzed Izuku's personality, it would be totally impossible to think that he would do something like that. "Izuku equals you're wrong, Ashido-chan, IW wasn't trying to scare you, much less laugh at you, I just found something a little funny in general. You know, I didn't think you could look so cute blushing. No wait, that wasn't what I meant to say." He had messed up again, and when he realized it he tried to get rid of that nervousness and ruin as quickly as possible the somewhat silly atmosphere he had just created while Ashido-chan was now deep in thought watching the freckled boy. "Mine equals." His words had been enough to leave her speechless, but not in a bad way. He seemed like someone happy, kind, helpful, humble, capable, very brave when he was in his suit, and in a certain way, he gave her some tenderness when she was shy and nervous around him. She had never noticed what Midoriya talked about All Might, about that smile that was able to fill others with peace and let them know that everything would be okay, but with the kind smile he had given her before, she had understood a little more of what he was talking about. "Mina equals W. Well Midoriya-chan, tell me, what kind of training do you have for me?" I quickly put an end to that atmosphere, hoping it would be enough to stop me from continuing to look at my partner and make him uncomfortable in some way, making him realize that the topic had to end there. "Izuku equals the." The green-haired man takes enough air to calm down and now focuses on the notes in his notebook to talk about his routine and what he was going to train until he improved enough or felt that he had achieved his goal. "Izuku equals I placed you at this point so that you could develop greater mastery and control over your gift. First things first, the leaves that fall from this tree, you must melt them with your acid, but only the center. You must control the power of your acid to be able to melt the leaf only in the specified area, or failing that, not do it. Once you achieve this your test will be finished and we will begin with the next phase. Also, despite having an excellent physique and great hand-to-hand combat, I advise you to handle some kind of weapon, so when we return to the professor we can ask Momo to make you a metal bar or something that you see useful, it will be efficient for you. With that, the green-haired man gave her another warm, tender smile before withdrawing, extending his thumb in front of him as a sign that he could do it. As he left a stupefied Mina, since not only had he been right about her not having the necessary control over her gift to take full advantage of it, but he had also been right in the sense that if she used a weapon, she would expand her combat capabilities without excessively using her acid or relying on it to move and use the weapon to attack. The fact that she could notice something like that she herself hadn't seen well was impressive and made her wonder, how long do you see me before you know? Quickly the idea of him watching her in her tight outfit sometimes made her shudder and blush, although only a little, since she shook her head to get out of the trance and start with the exercises, just like Uraraka, who was doing the jog that Midoriya mentioned to improve her physical condition. Once the training was finished, or rather given the instructions to his other companions, Midoriya would now approach Jiro to begin to tell him what they would do, but before informing him he would remember that he had to practice on his own for an important reason. He needed to find a way to use his one for all over his body without hurting or harming himself, in addition to handling the appropriate percentage to avoid breaking his bones like an idiot. For this reason, when he was with his partner, he indicated what she had to do for her training, in addition to explaining why he couldn't train with her yet, inventing the excuse that his gift was still too unstable for it, something that the other party seemed to understand, who observed him indifferently, trying to feign her sorrow because Izuku couldn't help her, which, although it was little, that sorrow was there, bothering her enough to make her think again about the boy in front of her. He once gave him his training plan, which was based on physical training, practically his training plan when he was in charge of cleaning the beach. 100 squats for repetitions of 4, 100 sit-ups for repetitions of 4, 100 push-ups for repetitions of 4, and finally, jogging for at least 2 kilometers. This would increase his physical condition and allow him to train a more than decent amount of hand-to-hand combat, giving him an impressive offensive capacity. After Jiro was almost scared by the training plan, Midoriya moved through the forest, moving away a little from his companions to reach a kind of cliff, a place where the sun could be seen beautifully and the sunset would surely be seen splendidly. Standing there, the freckled man began to think about how to train, how to further develop his control. The idea of something essential came to his mind. If he distributed his power evenly, maybe he could make some progress. He would start with 1%. In this way, he trained, feeling his body fill with energy, completely overflowing with it, only to suddenly stop because it was too much, and since he wasn't used to the process, he quickly became exhausted. Hours passed until it was 7 p.m. or so it seemed by the position of the sun. Izuku headed towards his companions, who were totally exhausted to the point that he had to help get each of them up, to head to the camp. When he arrived, his companions had already been there for some time. Apparently they had finished training at 5 o'clock to eat and bathe, while that totally devastated group could barely move to the bathroom, which made everyone present think clearly. What kind of training were they doing? Before Midoriya could head to his bathroom to proceed with his bedtime routine, he was stopped by a girl who wasn't about to let him go, grabbing him by the sleeve of his shirt to lead him outside the complex, right to the back, where he was directly confronted by the person he least expected, but for no reason. Opening square bracket question mark closing square bracket. Equals all assume you have nothing to do with Jiro-chan and everything that happened today was just a product of your closeness, and I won't constantly blackmail you with this photo and bother you both, only on one condition: I want you to help me train from tomorrow until next Sunday, okay? The girl was clear and decisive when it came to this aspect. She would not let the opportunity to become stronger and become more key in the development of being a hero slip away. She did not want to be left behind by anyone, and this was the best way, or so she argued, when the reality in her mind was somewhat different. Izuku equals awe. Izuku didn't feel like talking at that moment. He was really exhausted, but looking at that photo made him think. What the hell was I thinking, grabbing Jiro like that and without my shirt? He knew that the opponent could annoy them a lot, and even more his partner. Therefore his plan to train her tomorrow would be postponed for next week. That week that was passing, despite being barely Sunday, would merely be of the girl in front of him with a triumphant smile, knowing that the green-haired man was not going to refuse. Okay, tomorrow we will start training Ashido-chan. Mina equals tell me Mina-chan, Izuku-kun. From this day on we will have enough confidence for it. She ended the pink film cheerfully and flirtatiously, leaving the place and re-entering the complex to take a bath. She had achieved her goal, and that night wasn't over yet. She still had to find answers from Jiro. That camp was just beginning, and already everything seemed to be planned to make life more complicated for our protagonist. Who could have imagined everything he still had to go through? After a rather restless night, Ashido Mina found herself walking through the corridors of the complex. She had been awakened by the footsteps of a green-haired man who had apparently lightly knocked on her door to wake her up. The time was probably between 5 o'clock and 6 o'clock because it was still dark and the sun hadn't even come out yet, so it was logical to think that that was the time, but if so, why had he woken her up? That was the question he was going to ask the aforementioned when he found him, for the moment he walked in his pajamas towards the room where the aforementioned must be. Mina wasn't in the best of spirits, not only because she woke up so early, which is not normal for her, but also because of the fact that the night before she was interrogating Jiro with the intention of finding out what those close situations with Midoriya were meant and what he had admitted about spending time with him. But when she was about to do so, Momo came to her defense arguing that it was not the time to ask her about irrelevant things, causing the violet-haired girl to leave that place unpunished, which irritated our dear Ishido a little. The pink-skinned girl could notice how the aforementioned was at the door of the camp complex. But when she was about to say something to him in the most exaggerated way possible regarding interrupting her dreams, she noticed the clothing of the other who was wearing somewhat tight pants for purely aesthetic reasons, in addition to a black shirt that left his pectorals and arms completely exposed, giving an excellent, if not wonderful, view to the pink-haired girl who couldn't help but be dazzled by the appearance of the boy who was carrying a bottle of water in his left hand, one that had All Might's design, as well as his black shirt printed with All Might's smile on the back. In addition, he was wearing red headphones with a blue iPod that clearly referred to the colors of his idol's current outfit, which the girl noticed, causing her to think that it was truly a tenderness due to the love and admiration he had for his idol. Quickly, our protagonist noticed his companion and asked her to come closer to him, which Mina obeyed as if it were an order for a simple reason. She continued to be enthralled with the exposed body even if it was relatively little, of the young shonen, who spoke to her in soft whispers while watching her in those pink pajamas that allowed some freedom in her chest, leaving her cleavage free, a wonderful sight, but not for Deku who immediately tried to look elsewhere. 𝐧𝐢𝐬𝐴 I know it's early, but we must take advantage of the D-Day. My R routine starts very early in the morning. So I must ask you to please get ready to go out as soon as possible to do the exercises I have in mind for both of us. The green-haired man mentioned with some nervousness since he didn't know how his partner would react, who despite being very energetic, when it came to training and so on, wasn't that much. Mina huh, are you serious? Do you even know what time it is? How can you even think about training at this time? I'll go to my bed and rest. Then we'll leave first thing after breakfast. The authoritarian way of speaking to him, or rather yelling at him, was quite clear. Midoriya tried to make him lower his voice so as not to wake anyone up, but before he realized it, a certain violet-haired girl came out of the room, finding that pair in that somewhat compromising situation if you looked closely at the green-haired boy's blush and Mina's clothing, in addition to the hours at which they were making so much noise. Jiro 𝐴 Sorry if I'm interrupting something. Are you going to train Midoriya? I'll go with you. Yesterday, the exercises you gave me were a bit complicated. I'll need your advice today so I can concentrate or avoid wasting so much energy. The violet-haired girl hinted that deep down she was really excited to train alongside Midoriya, especially considering the fact that she had been enjoying spending time with him. But before she could approach her, Ishido activated a plan that she had devised right then and there. Although deep down there was only one thought bothering her. Mina I'm sorry Jiro, but Midoriya-chan already made plans for this week. If you want to train with him you'll have to wait until next Sunday. Or you can try to take him away from me by making it clear who Midoriya-chan belongs to, right? The pink-haired girl's mischief was quick to come to the surface, murmuring the last thing to her opponent, in such a way that the aforementioned couldn't hear and could only watch the scene with a blush on her cheeks because Mina was being too enthusiastic, to the point of taking him without realizing, or so he thought, by the arm, placing it next to those soft breasts, in such a way that the boy's blush didn't take long at all. His nervousness was totally on the surface. Jiro I understand. I don't know what you're talking about Ishido-chan. If he made a promise to train with you, which is what he always does, something totally normal when it comes to helping people in need, then I can't do anything about it. We'll start training on Sunday. Midoriya, don't forget such a way of speaking to the opposite gave her two understandings. One of them was that wanting to help someone and promising to do so was something totally normal, not something to feel special about. The last was the fact that she seemed totally indifferent to what was happening, although inside she was certainly restless and somewhat annoyed, mostly because of the closeness the pink-haired girl could get with Midoriya, that in a certain way, made her feel disgusted and attentive, but she couldn't show it. Mina equals you really are boring, Jiro. It's a very hard nut to crack. But if I'm right, a few days will be enough for her to start accepting or letting her know what she feels. Otherwise I'll simply be improving alongside Midoriya-chan. It's a win-win. The enthusiastic young woman thought after such a scene and noticing how Jiro returned to his room. She did the same, leaving Izuku in the place where he had been, still too red and nervous to be able to move, but after a few minutes the aforementioned woman left her room again with training clothes quite tight for her body figure, giving an exotic and exciting view for any man. Even our dear protagonist found it sexy, although he quickly got rid of the idea to look in another direction and avoid embarrassing himself even more. Mina equals Midoriya-chan, are you okay? I noticed something red on you. The pink-haired girl knew exactly what she was causing with that outfit. Although she didn't imagine that he was really watching her as someone who liked her appearance, this time not just a blushing boy, it was someone aware that the other side looked very sexy. For the first time, the freckled boy's thought was not innocent, at least not completely, and that was something that only Mina Ashido had caused, who positioned herself at his side before leaving the place, pulling him by the right arm to start the day. Come on, Midoriya-chan, we have a lot to do today. Don't we? The green-haired boy couldn't object to anything. He just looked in any direction while he was dragged outside, leaving behind in a rough and somewhat clumsy way the camp complex in order to concentrate again and start with the routine he did every day, although he would obviously slow it down in order to do it with Mina, who seemed to be much more lively than usual. The reason was unknown to Izuku. He was completely unaware that the reason was that he was training with that promising aspiring hero who had shown to pay more attention to him than she thought. At least that's what he imagined. Why? How else would you have such accurate notes on me and my way of acting and fighting? That in part at first made her reflect on how the aforementioned observed her surroundings. The idea that he watched her so attentively was nothing more than something relative, but if it were completely true she couldn't help but feel really flattered and a little pissed off about it. After all, it was the tender and submissive Midoriya. What things couldn't she do to him if she caught him watching her? After jogging 20 kilometers around the forest and the interior, our protagonist began the following physical training with Ashido, in a great way and clearly without talent, just as with the jogging. After several repetitions of push-ups, squats, parachutes, suicide jumps, Russian push-ups, among other varied activities, he ended up stretching each part of his body normally, since he had reduced the necessary amount of his routine for the other part to get used to it. He wasn't too tired, however, that didn't mean it hadn't been effective. For Mina's part, she was really exhausted, not to say lying on the ground, breathing very heavily. She couldn't imagine that the boy performed that routine normally, not to say daily, as if it were something common. Something bothered her. Unlike her, the boy next to her was standing thinking about the next thing to do, and never during the training did he feel any difficulty in doing something. That made Ashido doubt if that routine was really enough for him, or if perhaps for his own reasons he had used his gift. But when she remembered the prohibition that he placed on them, she refrained from thinking about it. That freckled man was not someone who could simply cheat or break a rule, of course if the situation did not require it or there was a life at stake. Before finishing his exercises and such, Midoriya asked Ashido to follow him to a secluded spot far from where his teammates would train. After walking through a fairly large stretch of forest, they came to a clearing that was much greener than expected, a place where he spent a few seconds observing everything around him. The young shonen observed everything with a certain longing. He liked nature enough to know how to appreciate a good landscape, but before continuing his walk, he noticed a certain sparkle in his partner's eyes as she looked at that greenish field. She was looking at something in particular, but what exactly? Once he had finished his physical exercises, the next step would be training with his gifts, but not just any training. Since it was the first day and then the improvements would be noticed, Izuku advised Mina to fight him, which she accepted without complaint, although she had certain airs of superiority because the boy's gift could not be used unless he wanted to break a bone or something similar. Therefore she thought that he would not be able to use it. He was not so crazy to do it, right? The fight quickly began. They were in a clearing with the sun in the middle. They were just starting their daily route, which suggested that the time was exactly the following. 1 p.m. The fight began with Ashido throwing herself at Izuku vertically, using her acid since there was 10 meters of distance between them initially, a distance that she cut in just 2 seconds, now being a few centimeters from contacting her right fist against the face of our protagonist. To be more exact, she was aiming for his cheek. But before the blow could be made, the aforementioned quickly and efficiently managed to block the blow by placing his left forearm in the path in such a way that he managed to completely stop that blow without any major damage, and considering the position of the pink-haired girl's legs, in addition to the inertia that her body had thanks to the great speed used to arrive on time and attack her target with great speed, her action would only be easier to use. A clever counterattack was what he used, with the help of the inertia that the opponent already had for having moved so quickly towards him. With his forearm he let the opponent's fist continue its course, only deviating it from its objective and then noticing how the abdomen due to the position of the body was uncovered. An accurate blow with his right fist was the only thing he did, directly to the abdomen almost close to her right rib, managing due to his strength to leave the girl breathless, which may seem ungentlemanly, but the reality was that if they were fighting and wanted to be heroes, they had to learn to deal with situations like those and also had to be honest. Izuku had held back with that blow. Ashido with a fleeting movement manages to recover somewhat from that blow that had lifted her a little from the ground to fall to the same, and after barely making contact with the ground with her left foot uses her break dance movements to perform a spinning kick on her own axis, almost making it seem like she was spinning in the same place but with her legs stretched in such a way that she managed to hit the shin of the aforementioned, who could not act due to the unpredictable movement, sending him directly to the ground. Before hitting the same target, he recovered by placing both hands on the ground, performing an effective handstand to finish with a pirouette towards the girl in question, who had gotten up thinking that Izuku would not act in time, running into the surprise of having the green-haired boy right in front of her with his left fist stretched out and as prepared to hit her face as possible. The girl acted in time, lowering her center of gravity and crouching down to create a small sphere of acid as the boy's fist passed over the spot where her head had previously been. With the acid ball finished, her left hand impacted the boy's abdomen, causing him to feel his clothes begin to melt and his abdomen go slightly numb. With speed, he took precautions, completely passing over a crouching pink-haired girl, falling behind her and beginning to move away a few meters. Having covered the necessary distance of 10 meters again, the freckled man could notice how his abdomen was extremely red. The acid had affected him differently, having numbed him instead of melting him. This made him understand how much Ashido was capable of controlling her acid, which was why she had to fight with everything. For a moment they just held each other's gaze, Mina somewhat impressed by the simple fact of knowing that Midoriya was following her in hand-to-hand combat quite well, and that perhaps if it hadn't been for her acid, who knew how the boy could have acted in response when he noticed that her opponent dodged him. Without noticing anything, Mina lost sight of a green-haired boy for a second who seemed to have been ready to attack a second ago. He had been in front of her 10 meters away just a second ago, but now he was gone. What had happened? Pure instinct made her step back a little, causing the punch aimed for her face to only graze her left cheek a little, creating a slight cut. Shocked at seeing the freckled boy move at such speed that it was even imperceptible for that second she lost, she had no choice but to try to get away, but she bumped into something she wasn't expecting. The boy was already behind her thanks to his speed, ready to hit her with a forceful blow with his right fist. But the girl's reflexes were superior in such a way that she managed to move her head to the right, dodging by centimeters that blow that crossed the entire path to her face, to end that encounter with a direct shot of her acid, a jet not so concentrated but with enough power to leave Izuku, who, after receiving it full in his chest, ended up falling on his back due to the great burning it caused. Ashido couldn't analyze everything that had happened. She had ended up acting almost by reflex. If it hadn't been for the fact that her senses were sharp enough, she would have ended up losing that confrontation with Midoriya's first move, although she couldn't understand exactly what he had done and how he had managed to move at such speed, but the priority at that moment was the aforementioned, who was writhing in a little pain from the concentration of the acid. His opponent tried to come to his aid, but before even reaching out to touch him, he quickly sat down to efficiently analyze everything that had happened, gathering everything he needed to know about the fight, creating possible moves from that, and obtaining useful data after such a confrontation. After a few moments, Izuku was about to speak to his opponent, but she was preoccupied with the mark left on the green-haired man's chest, which was quite clear and very reddish, almost as if he had been burned in that spot. Our next symbol of peace noticed this and calmly looked into her eyes, without any nervousness, only with that warmth he managed to transmit in those moments, those brief moments when it seemed someone needed him, those occasions where he was almost able to completely read the atmosphere and beyond that, giving people the words they needed and in a few seconds, achieving things that no one could imagine. The atmosphere seemed to have paused between them. All that could be noticed was that splendid smile illuminating the other's concern, making it disappear with that gesture and a few words. 𝐧𝐬𝐬 don't worry, 𝐧𝐤𝐬-chan. It takes more than this to bring me down. Come on, smile. I like it much more when you're cheerful than when you're just worried. For seconds, a clear blush could be seen on the aforementioned's cheeks before this was answered with a slight giggle from the same woman who seemed to only observe a smiling 𝐧𝐬𝐬 who began to get up from the ground with a certain tranquility. Mina equals wow, wow, who would have thought that our shy Midoriya-chan could become a Casanova? The mischievous 𝐧𝐤𝐬 made her appearance in the best possible way, bringing with her the notable blush of the green-haired boy who noticed again what he had mentioned in the middle of that moment, feeling embarrassed, but before he could excuse himself the pink-skinned girl continued Mina equals it would be great for you if you were able to speak normally with that confidence and security that you managed to transmit in those complicated moments. You could not only improve as a hero, but also manage to socialize a little more. Plus you could manage to attract many more girls than you think. What girl wouldn't be willing to go after a green-haired hottie with the necessary confidence and self-esteem? The aforementioned woman understood while observing the even more ashamed Midoriya who with a somewhat lost look asked her almost as if he didn't really believe what was being mentioned to him or as if it hurt him not to be able to achieve something like that. 𝐧𝐬𝐬 do you think so? It would be nice if I could really achieve it, maybe I would become a better hero and companion. 𝐧𝐬𝐬's response made it clear how heavy his thoughts were, how his mood seemed to decrease from one moment to the next just because of a precise comment regarding how he could improve his social life. Several memories of his life before obtaining one for all began to appear in his mind, making the moment even worse. It was enough for the pink-haired girl to reprimand him. Mina equals don't confuse things Midoriya-chan, it's not as if it were totally necessary for you to change. In fact, changing because of what others say is something wrong. You should do it only if you have the need and feel that the change is your decision, and if you change it will be for the better. He mentioned the opposite with a certain calmness in his gaze and a smile that gave him that lively aura that characterized him. Mina equals the people who love you do so for who you are. If you have friends despite your somewhat shy, nervous, and sometimes awkward personality, it's because you do something very well. Just be a little more confident when you speak. I trust that little by little you'll be able to do it. Those words plus 𝐧𝐤𝐬's attitude were enough for Midoriya who, upon noticing her, could feel a slight blush on his cheeks, as did the other who noticed a particular shine in those emerald eyes, getting lost in them for a few seconds, almost as if those eyes were the only thing he had to see, as if by stopping seeing them he would wake up from a dream that he didn't want to end. 𝐧𝐬𝐬 I'll take it into account as 𝐧𝐤𝐬-chan. Thank you very much for your advice, really, and for your trust. I assure you that I won't let you down. Once again, that feeling of tranquility, joy, and peace invaded Mina, who could only watch those beautiful emerald eyes shine with determination, a determination that managed to give her chills. For the second time, the outgoing Mina 𝐧𝐤𝐬 found herself blushing visibly at the simple but meaningful words of the shy Midoriya, making her wonder, what the hell was happening to her? Mina equals you're welcome, Midoriya-chan. See, come on, we have to continue TT training, there's still enough time today. The aforementioned did her best when pronouncing those words to avoid sounding silly or nervous, but 𝐧𝐬𝐬 didn't miss it, noticing it, but quickly getting up to nod and continue with their training together. As the afternoon slowly began to fall, our duo, who had been training until a few minutes ago, found themselves completely exhausted, lying on the ground, breathing heavily. 𝐧𝐬𝐬 stared at the sky, taking note of the time, then took his partner's arm to help her up. By telling him she couldn't, 𝐧𝐬𝐬 only signed the verdict of something she hadn't expected the boy to do. With the little bit of trust they had acquired that day, It was enough for the green-haired boy to take the girl and place her on his back to carry her with his hands holding her thighs to prevent her from falling. She was really embarrassed and surprised. It was not normal for the boy to do something like that, but she would not refuse. She was really exhausted, and for some reason, the aforementioned gave off a comforting warmth. Just enough to get 𝐴𝐵 to lie on his back while she hugged his neck with both arms to avoid falling, although in reality, she wanted to be as comfortable as possible in that VIP transport. While 𝐧𝐬𝐶 was taking the opposite to her resting place, or rather to the complex where they were staying, he could hear the girl talking to him. Mina = you're aware of what you're doing, aren't you, Midoriya-chan? By doing this, you won't be able to stop me from wanting to sleep on your back from now on. How are you going to stop it? The girl mentioned in a mischievous and naughty way while with her left hand she made a kind of circular probe on the well-turned and trained back of the green-haired man, something that made the aforementioned skin crawl a little, making him swallow heavily when he understood what he had done, but he couldn't help but feel that he was doing the right thing in such a situation. _. 𝐧𝐬𝐶 as 𝐴𝐵-chan. This was the right thing to do to be able to arrive on time. Besides, it's something any hero would do with someone who needs him. Midoriya tried to defend himself as best he could, hoping that what he said would be enough to give him a correct explanation of why he had done it and that it was not some kind of whim or something similar. Mina = I don't care about Midoriya-chan. And I thought I told you to call me by my name last night, but you've been calling me the wrong way all day. The pink-haired girl said clearly with a somewhat annoyed tone, as if she were pouting at what she mentioned, something that our green-haired girl, upon noticing, could only give in and whisper loud enough so that she could hear him while her blush grew bigger than ever. _. 𝐧𝐬𝐶 I understand Mina-chan. Those words were the hardest for the boy to say. However, Mina was blushing even more. The way he said her name, he didn't know why or the real reason, but it had been enough to accelerate his pulse to a certain point, something he wanted to ignore by squeezing his face against the sweaty shirt of his opponent, who could only belch steam out of his ears at such a situation. Nah. It was the closest I could find to a representation of what's happening. The difference is obviously the clothing in Mina's position, which is on Midoriya's back and being carried by him. The boys arrived at the complex without noticing that there were people in the room, which took them all by surprise. The entrance of Midoriya into the complex with Mina 𝐴𝐵 lying on his back while being carried by the boy, was something that left everyone with their mouths open, even Jiro, who seemed to have been talking to Momo a few seconds ago. Not only that, Midoriya being totally sweaty, his shirt was stuck to his body, revealing even more those sculpted abdomens. Something that could not be forgotten was the large hole that his shirt had from Mina's acid, causing his truly exposed chest to be noticed. Those pectorals sculpted with so much effort were enough to make everyone notice him, even the girls from Class 1B who were impressed by the physique of the one they thought was the weakest after Mineta in Class 1A. After such a scene and after no one mentioned anything because of the strangeness of it, 𝐧𝐬𝐶 and 𝐴𝐵 took a good bath separately, clearly before going to sleep. However, 𝐧𝐬𝐶 was interrogated by Kirishima, who continued telling him that that's for men, and on the other hand, Mina was in the classic girls' chat of every night, or most of them, all telling about their improvements and other things, until they touched on the subject of 𝐴𝐵 and 𝐧𝐬𝐶 because of how they arrived. Mina didn't have any answer at the moment. She could only nod a little. She was really exhausted and wanted to rest, but she was able to answer something simple that left everyone a little thoughtful. Midoriya-chan is an excellent boy. He would never try to do anything wrong with me. We just train until I'm exhausted. They were all aware that she was capable of pulling off the green-haired look, but the thought that 𝐴𝐵 wasn't making a fuss about it and was instead slightly blushing and a little nervous when speaking was the most peculiar thing of all. Uraraka, for her part, seemed to ignore that fact, while Jiro unconsciously began to play with her jacks with a slightly furrowed brow. Fortunately no one noticed it except for a certain black-haired girl. Once the night was ending, Toru asked a peculiar question. "What's your favorite color, girls?" Momo replied that she had two favorite colors. Jiro mentioned that her favorite color was purple and sometimes black. Uraraka implied blue. Tsuyu said brown, and when it was Mina's turn to answer, Toru apparently tried to do it for her by mentioning that it's red because of his attraction to Kirishima. But before 𝐴𝐵 could say anything, she just fell asleep like a rock. That night had ended. However, it would be the end of the first day, one of 7 days where she could live with Midoriya, and she couldn't wait for tomorrow. _K Padre Hacer Anacon Midoriya-chan. For his part, Izuku thought about what Mina had mentioned while he was writing down all his ideas for training the next day. What she said was true. He shouldn't change if it wasn't for the better and if he didn't see that it was necessary. Therefore, since he wanted to at least stop being so shy with the people he trusts and cares about, that would be his goal. He would begin to change his nervousness and shyness little by little, in the best way possible, consolidating his personality into a new way of acting once he stops being so shy and nervous. With that change in mind, the green-haired man could only close his eyes to try to rest while making something clear to himself. _Kien pensaria que a chan seria quien me a dejar purple heart timides. The days had passed little by little, having different situations between the classmates of that class who as the days went by managed to become more and more united, and of course, how could they not? Mina on her side was the most sociable and friendly girl of all, managing to make friends with impressive ease, while on the other side there was a shy green-haired boy when it came to dealing with other people, but due to his way of being when he wore the suit or the situation required it. It wasn't strange at all to see him act calm and serene, even though he only remained that way for a very short time. Thanks to Mina, he began to lose that constant nervousness, clearly having quite peculiar moments with his opponent to achieve this, something that, without realizing it, had begun to take effect. During the second day there was a particular situation where he accidentally knocked on Ashido-chan's room door when he went to look for her, but he didn't notice that it was slightly open, revealing a pink-haired girl lying on her bed in her normal pajamas, those consisting merely of a pair of shorts that were too short and a shirt that only seemed to cover her breasts, being slightly transparent, giving way to the imagination. What Midoriya didn't expect was that such a situation had been raised by the pink-skinned girl in a very cunning way. Managing to make use of the time in which the opponent arrived at her room to wake her up to put him in a compromising moment, and everything went from bad to worse when she consciously began to call him in order to get to know the green-haired boy's reactions while pretending to be asleep and moving her legs in an uncomfortable way. She ended up leaving them half open, giving a splendid view to her dear companion who only watched from the door swallowing saliva without heaviness. Hoping to control himself as much as possible, which he fortunately managed to do, he only withdrew from the room to knock on the door once it was closed, which let Mina know that the situation had turned out just as he expected, although deep down, in a certain way, she felt somewhat disappointed and burning. The fact that Izuku had seen her in such a way was something that really made her feel very attractive. After all, no one up until now, among her classmates or any woman in general, was capable of awakening certain instincts in the green-haired boy, but she managed to do it, and that, for her as a girl, gave her a certain air of self-esteem. After many more awkward situations where Mina threw herself at the green-haired boy, making him get very close to her face to the point of feeling her breath, the relationship between the two had reached a point where the green-haired boy was no longer as shy, withdrawn and nervous as before. He still retained his shyness at certain times, but other than that, he would talk completely calmly with his opponent when they were alone. However, when there was someone else, he would try to hide a little the closeness they had gained. Why? According to what Ashido mentioned, it would be better to avoid thinking that his way of acting had been changing for someone else, and he could keep it a secret for a while so that the surprise for his companions would be greater. Mina's real reason for avoiding him from showing so much confidence and closeness was the possible jealousy it would cause in a certain violet-haired girl who, although she hadn't been able to clarify anything, had noticed her much more irritated than usual. As if they were rubbing in her day after day the fact that because of who she is she couldn't spend time with a certain person. On the other hand, there was also the annoying Kaminari constantly supporting her, something that she was unconsciously beginning to accept by chatting a lot more with the other person, but there was something different about that kind of support and she could notice it even if it was fleeting. The liveliest girl in that class couldn't help but notice the constant closeness Kaminari was having with Jiro, which made her doubt about her opponent's feelings or if she herself had misjudged the situation so badly. At first, he had asked Midoriya to train to get stronger, in addition to having the additional objective of getting Jiro to confess what he felt towards the aforementioned, but with the passage of time he had forgotten the secondary objective. That extra goal seemed to have been erased from his mind. Even the main goal, he had started spending time with the aforementioned just to have the time to do it, just for the fact of wanting to be with the green-haired man, which wasn't so peculiar if one took into account how much they were constantly enjoying each other's presence. But they were still not close enough to be considered best friends. 𝐴𝐵𝐷 still didn't know much about the boy in question. The same seemed to be the case with the aforementioned, although he was much better informed than the other due to his observation and analysis skills. As the days went by, their training became more and more frequent, as well as more constant and better. The synchrony between them was quite good and the environment they generated was more than pleasant. On the one hand, there were the improvements in combat and control of her gift by Pinky 𝐴𝐵𝐷, who had managed to pass the aforementioned training, obtaining the ability to control her acid in such a way that now she could do it with 0% corrosiveness, which was quite positive since in that way she could avoid harming civilians who needed help, and it would give her the ability to support civilians and allies when fighting with her acid. In the combat aspect, she had improved her reflexes notably. After all, dealing with a Midoriya who suddenly appeared in front of her began to become easier and easier, but that was when she wasn't using her gift. Once the opponent began to warm up his quirks, so to speak, it was almost impossible to see it coming, being pure instinct what could help her get out of complicated situations. Midoriya, for his part, had managed to improve notably in the control of his gift when using One for All on his entire body. He still did not have a name for this technique since he saw it as incomplete, since he could only use 10% of his power and it was exhausted too quickly when using it, so he felt that it lacked much more development than what he had analyzed at first. While his speed, strength and reflexes had improved greatly thanks to the constant fights against Mina, who had also helped him to develop, in a somewhat crude way, his own fighting style, or so it seemed at first glance, one where he depended less on his arms, but still not stable enough to give it a name, the same thing happening with his control of One for All. But he knew that the steps he was taking were the right ones. Little by little he was removing the shackles that he had placed on himself by trying to imitate his idol at all times. In part he owed it to 𝐴𝐵𝐷, who during one of his training sessions, seeing him always using his fists, wasting the enormous potential that his legs possessed, ended up telling him something that would help him greatly in the future. Midoriya-chan, you don't need to act like your idol, be yourself. That will help you a lot when it comes to being a hero. For anyone, those words would be just that, words, but in Midoriya's case they had a great impact. What the analytical Mina, who had been able to notice that he was constantly trying to copy his idol, it wasn't that difficult to notice, had said was correct. If he stopped copying his idol, he could become a great hero, but with his own means, his own tricks. He didn't need to live in the shadow of someone who was obviously much bigger than him at the moment. He would always be considered just a copy and would be eclipsed by that shadow. He had to make a name for himself. He needed everyone to see him as such. Deku, a hero capable of saying, "You can do it." A hero who, when he appeared, all those who were afraid or in danger could only feel relieved after his words, "I'm here." That's what our protagonist had managed to discover with 𝐴𝐵𝐷's support, and he was really grateful to her. Not being able to help but see her as his best friend after Uraraka, everything he had achieved with her in such a short time, even their great closeness, was explained by all the events they had together during that week, giving each other more support than anyone else had ever given them, that in one way or another, led them to have great confidence in such a short time. Saturday, time, 6 o'clock am. That would be the last day in which they would be together to train, or at least that's what both boys thought. But before they could leave, as was normal for them every morning, their teacher Aizawa made them understand that that day was a day of rest. Of course he had done it his way, leaving a note hanging on the door of the complex, knowing that Midoriya, who always got up early to train along with his new apparent best friend 𝐴𝐵𝐷-chan, would manage to read it and would refrain from going out. His teacher might not have been the liveliest, but he was very observant and easily noticed how the closeness between Mina and Izuku had managed to change some important things in Midoriya, and that was extremely positive. Even though it was slow and not all at once and effectively, it was good enough to keep in mind. That camp was really being effective for some, and the proof of that was Midoriya and 𝐴𝐵𝐷, who were now developing a much closer relationship. But what the teacher in that classroom didn't imagine was that much more was in store for the green-haired boy in the remaining weeks of camp. Our beloved protagonists could only read the sign on the door with the words, "You're not going out today, so relax and have fun. It's your day off before tomorrow's hell begins." 𝐧𝐢𝐧𝐐 that's his way of telling us to rest and have a nice day. Aizawa-sensei is really bad at expressing his emotions, or maybe he just does it to prevent us from seeing him in any other way other than just a teacher. The green-haired man mentioned as he began to walk towards the living room with Ashido, who walked right next to him with her gaze facing forward but occasionally looking at the other side while giving him a smile that was able to make him blush a little. Mine equals, are you kidding? It's too clear that he loves us. He only cares enough for the people he truly cares about, and we are his dear students. He is more than happy to support us. How could anyone ever think anything other than that he loves us too much? The taller girl clarified in front of the aforementioned, waving her arms at her sides. She had raised her voice enough, and therefore the response of a certain individual was immediate, managing to alarm her and immediately silence her with just a few simple words. Opening square bracket ? Closing square bracket. Equals, if you continue shouting and making a scene instead of resting, you'll work 3 times as much as you've been doing all week. Mina The voice of that figure wrapped in a kind of yellow sleeping bag was enough to make the girl in question nod quickly and take the boy by her left arm to run somewhere far away from there to avoid his possible punishment. A few hours later, time had passed fleetingly, but for our dear protagonists who had simply taken the opportunity to chat with each other at all times, obviously now for some reason Ashido assured that it was not a problem for them to live together in that living room. After all, they had enough confidence between them to know that any kind of comment that had nothing to do with what they had in their apparent friendship could even easily rival the one she had with Jiro. But not being compared by Izuku, since according to him they were totally different and supported him in their own way, although this was not mentioned, only briefly thought by himself in search of justifying a little his relationship with Mina, his dear classmate and now best friend. However, the looks and words were not long in coming. Questions from Uraraka, Toru, Momo and others were not long in coming, as if it were something totally absurd to see Izuku chatting with complete confidence and without any nervousness with a girl or someone in general who was not his teacher. All might. No, wait, it was something too impressive and disturbing for some. The atmosphere on the male side made something clear. 𝐧𝐢𝐧𝐐 Midoriya was no longer so quiet and reserved when talking to someone of the same sex or the opposite. This was a clear warning for those who were interested in a female in their class. Why? More than one of the men knew exactly the apparent attractiveness of the green-haired man, one they called Midoriya effect, basically with that hero attitude. Those physical abilities, that enviable physique, and if that weren't enough, the intellectual level he possessed, also having manners beyond what anyone could think, rivaling a little with the elegant Yaoyorozu, it was not surprising that any girl would want a match as promising for the future and present as Deku was. However, a certain yellow-haired man seemed to not care. He was happy with his apparent progress with his partner, therefore he would not let a small change in Midoriya's attitude discourage him. Little by little he was beginning to gain ground in a war that Izuku didn't even know he was fighting, but for some reason things were more tense than he thought. Jiro didn't talk to Midoriya about anything, nor did she seem to give him the slightest importance or observe him. Instead, her point of view had become something constant. Ashido. Not being able to go completely unnoticed by the gaze of her classmates, being noticed by Momo, who until now had brief vestiges of what could be happening that most of the students ignored, even Deku, having some indications of what Jiro felt. That day ended extremely quickly. It would be the last for that pair, or at least that's what the green-haired man thought, but before anyone could mention anything he was interrupted by Ashido, who stopped him from going to his room since the aforementioned had finished going to shower. Having her standing in front of him, he couldn't help but feel a little embarrassed. She was still a few but significant inches taller than him, which bothered him a little because she could easily tease him about it, and had done so ad nauseum over the course of that week. However, at that point she wasn't there to bother him. The girl with raccoon eyes focused on taking Midoriya's hand and entering one of the closets near the exit door, where she locked herself in with the boy for a few seconds. The aforementioned was about to say something but was immediately interrupted by Pinky, who simply covered his mouth with both hands and got close enough to him to say something in a low voice. Mine equals Midoriya-chan. I'm sorry to bring you here, but I thought of something very special to do, and this was the only place where we could have the necessary privacy. I hope you're satisfied with this, because from this place you don't come out a virgin. The smile that provocative gesture peeling back the clothes from her neckline allowing him to see more of it just a little through. The way she was attached to her body, it was all too much for a naive virgin like Midoriya who before he had even begun to speak was already boiling like a volcano, but after them he had erupted, the red on his face was incomparable to any he had had before. Mine equals bua. The aforementioned snorted in the middle of a clear laugh. The opponent had completely fallen into her trap to the point of not being able to utter a word. He just stood there burning in an incomparable reddish color. Without a doubt she had enjoyed it more. I'm sorry Midoriya-chan. I had to do it. I've been thinking about that joke for too long. Huh. Anyway, we're here for another reason. We'll escape during the night. Izuku equals. For a moment he was analyzing what had been said. It seemed like the worst idea in the world, but he still wasn't completely recovered. In fact he was only thinking about what had happened. The thought of her taking his first time away from him. Mina's splendid body that until now he had not seen in that way except during a rather distant occasion where he had a free view of her peculiar black lace panties back then with lilac dots. He couldn't help but shudder at the idea. It was impressive the self-control he possessed to avoid having a problem right at that moment. A true man Kirishima would say. Mine equals I'll take that as a yes. For now we have to wait. Aizawa will close soon and we can start our night getaway. Midoriya-chan JoJo reference. The pink-haired girl understood while she looked with a beautiful smile at our protagonist who could only nod as quickly as possible to look away to any other place. Although the space where he was quite narrow and there was not much more than coats and some various things like brooms, he did not want to look into the eyes of the other or he could surely fall into something stupid. The minutes passed quickly, just as Aizawa had expected, in that distinctive yellow sack that seemed to be his suit, since he wore it so often as if it were his everyday suit. After closing the door, he retired to his room to rest, which left him wondering, did he sleep inside the sack on a bed or on the floor, wasting his bed? It was a question that wouldn't let many rest. That pair quietly left the room, then headed towards the exit door and with the help of his now improved control of his acid, he managed to make an effective movement by introducing a little of his acid to slide the lock enough and quickly leave the place. Once outside it was clear that Midoriya was somewhat uncomfortable. It wasn't like him to break the rules just because. He had to have a more than viable reason for it, but something like simply doing it on a whim was not his thing. But his worries about it vanished, just when he was about to start whispering about what could happen to him because he had disobeyed his teacher. He could notice the smile of the girl in front of him. It was a warm one, capable of making his doubts disappear, a smile capable of everything and more. For a second a clear thought crossed his mind when he saw such a smile dedicated to him. If it weren't for that smile, I certainly wouldn't be standing here outside in the cold and at risk of being discovered. Those words were clear and had an obvious message, but how could he avoid it? That smile seemed to be the representation of everything that was good in the world, even capable of fighting hand to hand with All Might's hopeful smile. Midoriya left his doubts aside and walked right next to the other girl who took the green-haired boy's hand, making that moment more intimate, something that Deku didn't refuse. It made him a little embarrassed that she was taking his hand without a doubt, but it was Mina. They had had much more intimidating contacts that could embarrass him just remembering them on previous occasions. Ashido continued walking alongside Izuku, occasionally looking into his eyes, appreciating how the greenish color gradually began to deepen as they sank deeper into the darkness of the forest, accompanied only by the sound of cicadas, crickets, and a few owls, creating an idyllic atmosphere for what they were about to do. After a few minutes of walking, they reached a clearing, the place where they had been training together, the place where they had lived together for so long. Even though it had only been a week, both of them felt as if so much time had passed that it was impossible not to feel an ounce of nostalgia, and to think that everything would end the next day. Pinkie didn't want that to be the case. Something inside her broke a little every time she imagined that after those weeks everything would go back to how it was before. She didn't want it to end, but she understood that Midoriya did want it. That's why as they walked she watched him carefully. She looked at his emerald eyes that seemed to shine more in the darkness, something that not only surprised her, but also made her feel that she wanted to always see that look. She wanted to always be like that, next to him, that week would never end, but what else could she achieve? She only had to appreciate him, that beautiful and heroic image that she longed to always have by her side. In the middle of that clearing, the two lay on the ground, side by side, staring up at the night sky. The grass was damp, clearly due to the night dew, making it too soft for the two boys, who simply stared up at the sky. The darkness of that sky was nothing special, or so you could say of any night, but not this one. Stars of different colors shone with a certain intensity, forming different constellations that Izuku recognized thanks to his studies and knowledge. Little by little he was pointing out the constellations and explaining each one of them to Mina. She just listened with a smile on her face, although inside she felt that with each word she was moving further away from the boy. That feeling was killing her inside. She didn't want to feel such a burning inside in any way. On some occasions he even gave her an understanding of the astral meaning of each constellation to a certain extent. When a particular constellation arrived, Izuku couldn't help but make a certain comment regarding Mina that would shake the other side enough. Even if it was only about stars, his words would really impact the pink-haired girl's heart, who would undoubtedly remember that day for a long time. That constellation is similar to you, Mina-chan. Leo, the representation of the Nemean lion. It may sound a bit silly or clumsy, maybe you even think I'm trying to be clever, but I've thought about it for a while. You are someone imposing, capable, strong, lively, and not to mention that you can become a true or perhaps the best heroine if you set your mind to it, since your smile is enough to build a new symbol of peace and security. Undoubtedly, if I were to ever disappear or something were to happen to me, I would be happy to know that the world will still have you, Mina-chan. Some might see it as simple words, others might take it as flirting, but Ishido knew he was completely serious. Midoriya had mentioned to her on many occasions what he thought of her, how strong she was, how capable she could be whenever necessary, how much he admired her for being so impressive, but now that he said it in the middle of that night, there was something in his words that managed to accelerate the pulse of the pink-haired woman, who couldn't completely believe it, but only thanked him by saying, "Thank you." Nothing else was needed for them, and Mina was still somewhat bewildered. A few hours later, a few hours of chatting passed until the night truly turned dark, making it clear to both of them that it was time to return to the complex. But before he could do so, as Deku was about to start his way back, he felt something or someone grab his shirt sleeve. It was peculiar. When he turned around, he noticed it was Ishido, who was staring at the ground. For a second this disconcerted the green-haired man until he came out of his confusion when he heard the words of the other party with a voice that showed how broken someone who was always smiling with great strength and emotion could be, demonstrating that she was not always capable of achieving it, less so with what she was experiencing on that last day of their agreement. I'm sorry, Midoriya-chan. I'm really sorry. I shouldn't have blackmailed you with a picture to take up your time. You probably hate me for it, I'm sure of it. I'm really sorry, Midoriya-chan. I'll understand if you just think I'm irresponsible or annoying, but please, I don't want our friendship to end once it's Sunday. Please, Midoriya, I'm asking you. Those words were completely honest. Her broken voice and wet eyes gave an understanding of the situation in which the lively and capable Mina Ishido was, who always kept a smile and spirits up in everything, but at that moment she was about to be devastated. The time they had spent together was truly the best thing she had ever had. She did not want it to end because of her mistake. 𝐧𝐢𝐧𝐤. Well, I can't deny that what you did wasn't right, and at first it bothered me a little. The green-haired man finished with a somewhat worried look on his face, implying that at first he was really angry about what had happened, even if it was just a little, but before Ishido could interrupt him to say something, he continued with his characteristic way of speaking at that time, seeming to be someone different. 𝐧𝐢𝐧𝐤. However, that doesn't mean I'm upset now. I enjoyed myself with you. What happened only did me a great favor, since not only did I gain a little confidence and the best advice possible, but I also managed to get a best friend. I don't regret anything, Mina-chan. Everything I did with you was nothing more than having fun and learning to be a better hero. For that, I thank you, Mina-chan. Midoriya's smile after saying those words was one of immense understanding and affection. Not everything would return to normal once Sunday came. What had happened that week would not be forgotten, since he had truly gained a best friend, and he would never forget it. Their time together was just beginning, and that was his way of telling her. _𝐧𝐢𝐧𝐤. Now, wipe away your tears. I don't like seeing you cry, especially if I'm the one who makes them. I love seeing you smile so cheerfully. After all, that smile transmits so much security, confidence, and fun to me that sometimes it's impossible not to want to see it all the time. Without a doubt, what I like most about you is your determination to be happy. She had dropped a bomb on Mina without realizing it, and she didn't seem to care because she literally didn't understand the importance of what she had just said. The great compliment she had just given her caused more than a blush in Ishido, who in response was only silent for a few seconds and then rushed to hug Midoriya while her pulse continued to accelerate. She was really happy that nothing that had happened would ruin her relationship with Izuku, but from now on, they would really spend much more time together. That made her feel so lucky and happy that she couldn't express it. Mine equals. Calmly, she began to wipe away her remaining tears, since Midoriya had already wiped the rest with his hands when he told her all that. To end that magnificent night, they continued their way to the complex, knowing that even though their week had ended, it didn't mean that it had all been a commitment and nothing more. Mina was really happy, and with her heart racing too fast to describe or think about why she was in such a state, she attributed it to her happiness with the green-haired man to end that night, stopping in her tracks before entering the complex in question to muffle a smile and let out some words that Izuku couldn't hear. My favorite color. Who would have thought? It's actually the emerald green of her eyes. With those words said, the pink-haired girl noticed how Midoriya turned to look at her with that characteristic smile on his face, and she could only reach out to reciprocate his smile and throw herself at him, giving him a strong hug that he reciprocated despite being at the door of the complex and with the possibility of being seen. He didn't mind too much. Ishido's warmth was too pleasant to simply ignore or let that moment between them pass. That week had undoubtedly been magnificent. He'd had the best time possible with Mina, and that was absolutely clear. He had no intention of leaving her alone, and being able to appreciate her smile every day was the best reward for him. However, that scene was witnessed by a certain girl who, faced with what she saw, could only bite her lower lip in frustration and retreat to her room with that feeling of anger inside her. Unseen by the two boys, she entered her room to pounce on her bed and begin to squeeze her pillow while asking herself something that wouldn't be answered until much later that day. What's happening to me? What is this feeling? Sunday, second week of training. The day before, both Mina and Izuku had a moment for themselves. One where they put aside all kinds of common thoughts as well as distance for the most part. Forgetting that they had known each other for a short time, they gave each other mutual support, and Izuku showed his partner that he was really happy with everything that had happened that week, that she shouldn't worry about everything going back to normal because for him it wouldn't, since that week, according to his words, he had gained a best friend that he didn't think he would lose for anything in the world. After her words and actions, the pink-skinned girl attacked our protagonist at the entrance of the complex to hug him in the middle of the night, unaware that they were seen by a certain violet-haired girl who couldn't help but feel sad or somewhat melancholic upon seeing such a scene. A frustration that she didn't know invaded her when she noticed how Midoriya, her classmate, hugged Ishido, her supposed friend, with the confidence of someone who had known him for years. It was so frustrating for her that she got to the point of simply not making any noise and going as quietly as possible to her room, and once she was inside without being noticed by anyone, she began to wonder, what's wrong with me? While hugging a pillow and continuing to ask himself the same question over and over again. However, this time, to understand most of what is going to happen, you must take into account what the girl was doing while Izuku's week with Mina was going on. A week that had not only made her wake up but had brought her feelings that she simply could not express or transmit for reasons unknown to herself, only wanting one thing: stop this feeling. 1 Degree Weekday Entertainment 𝐾𝐽. The aforementioned was inside the complex after being rejected by Midoriya because of the supposed promise he kept with the pink-skinned girl. At first, that simple sentence from Ishido regarding claiming what belongs to you had managed to disturb her. Izuku was nothing more than her friend, and she wasn't understanding that at all. That was why she was so close to Midoriya. She was trying to provoke her and make her reveal herself, as if something like that could happen. Mina couldn't beat her in a game that she wasn't going to play under any circumstances. So while the girl concentrated on tuning her instrument, she tried to get the fact of what had happened out of her mind so she could concentrate with total freedom on her task. Playing a little always relieved her stress. She hoped this time would not be the exception, However, her problem appeared as soon as she began to play or tried to do so. With every chord he tried to play, with every moment in which he tried to make his guitar sound correctly, it continued to get stuck again and again, failing as if his agile and trained fingers had become clumsy from one moment to the next. He had experienced that feeling before. His mind quickly went back to that day when he first began to converse with Midoriya. Flash back after the 𝐬𝐧𝐿 attack. Many senseless things had taken place, from a problematic test by their head teacher to a much more dangerous problem when they were attacked by a strange and too large group of villains who had managed to keep the majority of the students on the ropes. If it weren't for their courageous attitude, they would surely have died before even realizing it. That's what the vast majority of the students in that class thought. They were undoubtedly strong people and future heroes, but it was somewhat far from reality. They had all been supported and guided during the incident by one person. A boy who had given his all to organize his classmates and survive as long as possible, even though this had later been put on the back burner when his teacher's life was in danger, acting like a hero to save his life even though he was a useless person who could break every part of his body trying to do something. Opening square bracket question mark closing square bracket. Equals Jiro-chan, sorry to see approach like that, but the P teacher informed us that we should take P precautions when returning home because of what happened with the V Villain League. IW was wondering if didn't want me to accompany you home safely. Also, Aizawa-sensei told me that IC couldn't go on my own, that IH should accompany someone so IC could retreat and support someone. Would you allow me? That boy mentioned awkwardly. He had barely been understood, but this shy attitude did not help him at all. Previously the girl in front of him thought that this way of being was only useless and an obstacle to carrying out his work as a hero. He thought that she took this as a joke, but after such an incident, that way of seeing things had changed completely. Jiro equals Aizawa-sensei is quite clever. That way we could clearly minimize the risks of being attacked individually, and if we took the courage to attack each other while being at least in groups of 2 we could move and escape by splitting up. But why did I have to go with him? Those were the thoughts of an expressionless and analytical violet-haired girl as she watched how her opponent was more blushed and nervous than on any other occasion. Previously, this would have displeased Jiro, insisting that he should act like a man, but now, he just didn't care at all. Jiro equals if Aizawa-sensei said so, then there's nothing left to discuss. Come on, wait, why didn't you go with Uraraka? Aren't you always with her? The question was valid and quite clear, although asked as always with the unpleasant attitude she possessed at all times, except when she was practicing her instruments or meeting with her classmate Momo to study and chat. Incidentally, she hadn't been accompanied by Momo because after the attack by the League of Villains on Yaoyorozu thought about taking a few days off for personal reasons and at the request of her parents. Izuku equals EH. No, I don't spend much time with her. It's just that I don't have anyone to go home with normally and she ally accompanies me, but today she left early with Iida-kun. However, IW will understand if you prefer to go with someone else. The green-haired man could be seen somewhat downcast after those words, but it was only for a moment before he looked back to the front with that smile that characterized him, that smile that brought light and happiness to his surroundings. Jiro equals how can he act so cool and yet so clumsy at the same time? Is it natural or does he plan it? I don't think he plans it. Worse yet, how does he have such a bright smile? Sometimes I can safely say he has a strange glow about him. Wait, why the hell am I even thinking about this? The violet-haired girl reacted quickly when she realized that she had been observing that bright smile from her opponent. Even if it had only been for a few seconds, it could undoubtedly have been uncomfortable for her opponent, but he didn't seem to take it too seriously and was more focused on that girl and her possible response. Jiro equals tell me, do you see anyone else in the room? Gesturing around with both hands clearly implying the fact that the entire room was empty. They were the last to leave and there was no other option other than Midoriya. Jiro equals come on, I have to get home early to finish my homework. I didn't understand most of it and I have to study for the exams. The other party made it clear with her characteristic unfriendly behavior while walking towards the exit, being closely followed by the aforementioned, who upon hearing this, mentioned her calmly and somewhat nervously, but when he looked somewhere other than in her direction, he managed to control them a little. _Izuku equals Jiro. I have the N notes from the C class, wouldn't you be interested in them? My way of W writing is somewhat C clumsy, but when taking N notes I take the most essential and important things. Maybe they could be useful to you she indicated awkwardly and still nervously to her opponent while she quickly took out of her bag a green notebook with some All Might pictures on the cover. Something classic of that boy without a doubt, thought the girl who carefully observed the notebook that her opponent was offering her, without a doubt a somewhat peculiar gesture, but one that she didn't need. Jiro equals no, thanks. I'm more than capable of taking my own notes. You don't have to worry about that. I've got everything I need written down in my notebook. I just need to review while I'm free at home, and I'll have everything covered. She explained the contrary with a certain inexpressiveness, although that was normal in her. That tendency seemed to break for a few seconds when she was offered the notebook of the opponent. The truth had angered her a little that the boy had underestimated her to the point of thinking that she had not taken notes on a class and a subject as important as the one that would be touched on in that exam. Did he think she was stupid? Izuku equals O. I understand. It's good to know that why you don't require help. That just means that you were an excellent student as well as a heroine. You will be very good undoubtedly. He had mentioned this last thing almost in a whisper, completely imperceptible to anyone, but he had said it alongside the girl with the best hearing on the entire planet and perhaps the entire institute. With his jacks it was easy work. The aforementioned woman couldn't change her expressionless expression at the mention of this and couldn't help but question him. Normally, she wouldn't have, but such praise coming from the boy who had basically saved their lives during the attack by the League of Villains and who had even faced a beast that had given All Might quite a fight, she couldn't help but feel curious as to why he was mentioning it. Jiro equals why do you think I'll be a hero? Do you really think I can be one, or are you just saying it for the sake of it? Kyoka asked while observing him calmly, but her tone showed some annoyance, even if it was only a bit. She was somewhat frustrated to think that he had only been able to say it for the sake of saying it. That possibility really angered her. Our green-haired man didn't hesitate for a second in responding as he stood in front of his opponent and began walking backwards to avoid stopping and to be able to look her in the face while he was about to tell her what he would say. He wasn't looking to offend or upset her. Izuku wasn't capable of something like that, and he could tell from the moment he looked at her in search of a suitable response. Izuku equals are you kidding? Your quirk is incredible, Jiro-chan. Not only that, it is impressive in too many aspects. Just with your heartbeat you can emit incomparable sonic pulses, and if you release the necessary hand-to-hand combat, you would also be unstoppable in close combat. You are a complete package. As if that were not enough on the battlefield, you are smart, determined, capable and brave. You would not hesitate to support someone in need. That is what a true hero does. Believe me, Jiro, I understand better than anyone the frustration of not being able to become good or a hero, but you will definitely be able to become a hero. Nah, what? It won't always be a picture of Izuku mega flirt. Those words had been enough to leave the spectator Jiro stupefied, who had not expected such concrete points regarding why she would be a good heroine, much less coming from the boy who she thought was the one who would be the least likely to observe her or notice her for the mere fact of being strong enough to be taken into consideration as the third or fourth strongest in the class due to his demonstration of power and capabilities in the attack that had occurred a few days ago. She couldn't utter a word, she just stood there. She had even stopped walking to look into the green-haired boy's eyes, not seeing even a hint of joke or bad intentions in those greenish orbs. She couldn't deny it. Watching them was hypnotic, and the simple fact that he had said that while staring at her hadn't helped at all except make her blush a little. However, Izuku had noticed what was mentioned and tried to do something to stop himself from blushing so much. What he had said could be misinterpreted, but for his part, the rocker was just watching with a certain inexpressiveness, one that was gradually fading away. Someone besides his parents and Momo supported him in becoming a hero, and he believed he could truly achieve it. Not only that, he had managed to gather all his positive qualities and mention them to them. Maybe that boy wasn't what he thought he was after all. Just maybe he could become someone truly different from what he imagined, not so clumsy or such a waste of time. He couldn't say anything to such an act, he simply responded as best he could in the midst of such a situation while giving him a very, very discreet and, for many, insignificant smile on his face, but for the boy it was something of an instant. Despite that he could appreciate that very slight smile, it had seemed too strange for him to make such a gesture. Not being able to believe what the other party told him, while she looked him straight in the eyes, making him think that for a moment it was just the two of them talking and nothing else around them, completely forgetting his shyness upon hearing those words that managed to accelerate his pulse and make him feel lucky to have been with her like that at that moment. Thanks Midoriya. It's weird not hearing you say stupid things or get nervous, but putting that aside, you're right. I also think I could become a good hero. Maybe my gift is a little more impressive than I originally thought. Just maybe you're right. 1 month after that event. Continues to happen during the flashback. With the sports festival approaching at a somewhat alarming rate and the exams over, the violet-haired girl couldn't help but think that she was somewhat distracted lately because she had been having trouble playing her instruments after the event of the attack by the League of Villains. At first she thought it would just be possible tiredness or fatigue accumulated after what had happened. After all, what had taken place was a rather problematic and even traumatic event, but as the days and weeks went by she ended up ruling out that possibility. Just having one in her hands, something was disturbing her when it came to playing. What exactly? She had no idea. She only knew that it had started after the attack of the League of Villains and the fact that some of her classmates were injured. Professor Aizawa, the Hero 13, and Izuku Midoriya, the younger one, who by the way had been spending a lot more time with her talking about varieties, although not in a continuous or consecutive way, just something that happened every few days and somewhat quickly, nothing too long-lasting. Kyoka couldn't even play the simplest tunes on any of her instruments, even her most idyllic specialty. The guitar seemed to be something totally new to her, that had had her in a worse mood than they could imagine, to the point that even her friend Yaomomo, as she calls her, had agreed to give her space until she recovered somehow. That girl seemed frustrated all the time. Even in class she was having trouble concentrating during practice or any exercise or activity in general, and she had been like that for a month. Evidently a certain green-haired guy noticed it and wouldn't let it go any longer. The aforementioned man had approached her to chat, as was normal these days, when the girl preferred to be on the school field instead of the cafeteria, so she could eat more peacefully and focus on how to recover her ability to play. Her parents had advised her to try to relax because apparently it was nothing more than a psychological attack. She was having emotional problems, but she didn't know exactly what or why, which prevented her from dealing with it directly or ignoring it until it went away. There she was, lying on the grass with her legs stretched out enough and her body leaning against the tree behind her, supporting the slight weight she had as she leaned back to rest even a little on that tree. The position was ideal for relaxation, but clearly she didn't have time for that. She needed to find a way to get back to her old self or improve. Unfortunately, when she most desired solitude, a figure began to approach, and that was precisely why she had moved away from the dining room during that dry spell where she was supposed to be having lunch, so she could have solitude. That figure knew her and she didn't want to see him right now. The little good she had seemed to have been taken away from her for who knows what reason, and it was precisely the boy who secretly and deep down she admired for what he was capable of doing and everything that meant sometimes the simple fact of noticing him smile at her in a distracted way. She didn't want to see him, but he couldn't know that. Izuku simply sat next to her, 2 meters away. He didn't want to bother her or make her uncomfortable, since even though they had a relationship that went beyond just acquaintances to the point of being friends, he still couldn't muster the confidence necessary to simply reach out and give his best to encourage her or support her with whatever problems she had. He had to do it little by little and one step at a time. Jiro equals what do you want, Midoriya? If it's the iPod. Don't worry, I lent it to you until you got bored. There's no need to return it right now. You have time to listen to the music you said you liked. Don't rush. Her way of speaking was clearly discouraged, although deep down she wished she hadn't expressed herself in such a monotonous and dull way. She felt that if she hadn't done so she would be even worse. For some reason, being around Midoriya she could distress, and sometimes, although very few and hidden, she could vent better than with Yaomomo. Izuku equals it's not about that, Jiro-chan. You see, I've noticed you've been acting very strange over the past month, too much to tell the truth. At first, I respected your privacy to avoid bothering you or making you uncomfortable. I thought it would be something very personal, but if it's getting to the point of affecting your performance both academically and during the hero tests, I can't allow it to continue like this. Underscore. The atmosphere was somewhat tense after those words, but not on Jiro's part but on Midoriya's, who seemed frustrated, which he was, too much so by the fact that he couldn't help her with more than superficial advice for him, but which for Kyoka were shocking. After all, they weren't said by her friend Yaomomo, the so perfect and wonderful friend of hers who had mentioned it to her almost in that way but with clear differences. But coming from Midoriya, and that tone of voice made her feel somewhat pressured, almost tense at such words as if it were something totally new, which it was. Izuku wasn't trying to make her feel bad, he wanted her to vent, to count on him, but he couldn't wait for the other side to react the way she was, who for a few seconds just looked at the ground. Jiro equals what can you know? Underscore. Those words were more of a whisper so as not to be heard, basically the grenade ring being removed from it before the countdown to its explosion began. Deku couldn't see her gaze, he only saw the behavior of the opponent strangely since he had heard what she said but he couldn't imagine what she was about to tell him and in what way. Underscore. Jiro equals what can you know? Midoriya, what can you know about the frustration of not doing anything right? What can you understand about the fact of not having anything more than a little to feel proud of or good about yourself and then having it snatched from your hands in front of your face? You can't understand me, Midoriya, you simply can't because you're not going through what I'm going through. Can you understand that, or is it not possible for him? Exemplary. Midoriya, underscore. Her voice and tone were totally different, not even in sync with her face, which instead of having her indifferent expression had one of frustration and anger, while the tone of her voice was somewhat brittle as if she were about to burst into tears, and it was understandable. Underscore. If you put yourself in her place, it wasn't so far-fetched. She was a girl who had little besides her determination and particular gift for saving people in reconnaissance missions, but her particular talent for music, nothing more than that. She thought she wasn't an attractive girl, nothing compared to Uraraka or Mina. She didn't think she was smart or cunning like Tsuyu or Yaomomo. She didn't think she was fun like Mina or Toru. She didn't really have anything going for her. She was just that, a girl with a problematic aptitude that few wanted as a friend, a girl who clung to the fact of at least having her music to be able to express what she felt and wanted, while staying in the same strange circle of friends. A circle of friends composed of an electric imbecile who, instead of paying attention to classes or trying to be a good friend, was nothing more than a pervert with the intention of only flirting with her, and her other only friend Yaomomo, who despite being there for her could never understand her. She was the pinnacle of perfection, while the violet-haired girl was the opposite, at least from her point of view. If the only thing that consoled her for being so far behind the rest was taken away from her, it was normal that she was so frustrated. The thing to which she had dedicated so much time with her parents had been taken away from her. The thing that was everything to her, not to say her second career basically. It was so frustrating that she simply couldn't express it, and all for something as stupid as remorse, guilt. Izuku equals I understand you more than you think. I know you'll see it as nonsense or as if I'm just making things up, but I'm telling the truth. I understand what it's like to not be good at anything, to not be able to achieve the little you want while others can do it with ease. I understand what it feels like to be frustrated and about to throw everything away because you're not considered someone who can achieve what you want due to mere inabilities or problems. I understand, it's simply frustrating and even more underscore. His words carried a great weight and Jiro could notice it. She could feel every shred of guilt falling on her. Did she really not know Midoriya? No, she didn't. While he had taken the time to do so, she for her part didn't even bother with it. Since she had never seen Midoriya as a boy who had an important past or similar, she thought he was always a perfect boy with a quirk that he didn't know how to handle. Izuku equals I understand that what you want and my case are not the same. In fact, our pasts are also totally different. While Jiro-chan was able to receive support in the past from her parents, I for my part do not have much to tell you, but what I can tell you is that although I do not feel the same as you, I can understand you and I want to help you, Jiro-chan. Because you are my friend and we are aspiring heroes. Underscore. A hero never leaves someone in need even if they don't ask for help. Underscore. It was true what he said. He had managed to stop himself from crying. He had always been a very sentimental person, too much. But he understood that at that moment crying would not help Jiro. He had to be strong and be there to support her through whatever happened. He had obviously kept his past to himself. He could have told her and made her feel bad or sorry for him, even made her understand why he said he understood her, but that would simply be selfish and something foolish that he could never do. That was his way of acting and it could be noticed relatively easily. 𝐾𝐽 could only appreciate the words of the other. She wanted to repudiate them. She wished he hadn't mentioned them. She wanted to forget them and ignore him, to leave the place, but something forced her to be there, to continue seeing that face that always transmitted so much peace, to the point that she couldn't stand it anymore and ended up letting out her problem without even knowing that it was or that was what was blocking her. Jiro equals I'm not like you, Midoriya. I'm not a hero. I faced death and hesitated. The fear was too much for me to move to help you when you needed it. I stood still when I saw how they were about to hit Aizawa-sensei. I wanted to move but I couldn't. Fear won. I am not and I will not be a hero. I was simply always dreaming with my eyes open and now I have nothing but dreams that I can't fulfill. For a second after what 𝐾𝐽 yelled at him, the green-haired man stood still, but only for a second. He then calmly approached his opponent, his expression somber, covered by his green hair, almost as intense or even more so than the grass. The wind blew where they were, causing both of their hair to move beautifully and strikingly for the opponent. The girl couldn't react. She felt she had touched a dangerous or delicate nerve in her opponent. She was about to fall backwards if she hadn't been caught in a hug by the aforementioned man who, in response to such a gesture, left her completely immobile, unable to do anything. She didn't know why that sudden hug. Did he feel sorry for her? It was normal. Now she had nothing else. What else could she provoke in the other person other than pity or some sadness? Izuku equals you're wrong Jiro. Nah. The closest I found to what was being talked about. Deku's words were enough to make her opponent's legs go numb. She was feeling so weak under her opponent's touch, as if she had actually been expecting a hug of that magnitude from someone other than her parents. No, even if they had hugged her like that, perhaps everything would have been solved sooner. But no one had the courage and they preferred to let her get over it alone, without any advice, although she had not mentioned anything to them either. But Midoriya, even without being asked for help, had given her such a gesture and she did not know how to respond at that point. She could only stand there, motionless before such a gesture while avoiding the urge to cry at that precise moment. Izuku equals you can't be a normal hero. She felt that those words were true. After all, if she hadn't acted in those situations, which a hero would do, she couldn't do anything else. But Midoriya continued without her being able to separate from the hug and start running to another place as she wished. Izuku equals you can't be like that because you'll never be like the rest. It's not about being afraid. Who isn't? Only an idiot wouldn't be afraid of death. I'm also very afraid of it, but what makes us different is that with every action I take, I don't think or analyze, I just act. The green-haired man continued as he continued to hug the other person in that place, a confused girl who needed a little help, who was too strong, but who by chance was in a small moment of weakness. Izuku equals it doesn't mean that what I do is good. My way of thinking is careless. I acted impulsively when someone needs me. That makes me naive and clumsy. Sometimes even if I help someone, just look at how I use my gift. I can't help but break some part of my body when I do it. I'm a complete disaster, but you can be the best hero there is if you set your mind to it. I don't know what happened to you to make you feel like you can't take it anymore or think about giving up. But believe in the words of a friend. I assure you that anyone can be a hero, you more than anyone. Izuku equals I'm not telling you this because you're my friend. Everyone can become heroes. Many of our classmates will be good heroes, maybe even better than me by far, but you are by far the one who will go the furthest. Your determination, your talent, your ability, that aura you transmit when you help someone, that even though socially you say that you are not someone attractive to said friends or people, the truth is that whoever takes the time to get to know you will never want to leave your side, because Jiro-chan, you are someone wonderful and without a doubt you can be the best hero. No, not only that, 𝐾𝐽-chan, you can be whatever you set your mind to. They were honest words. She wasn't looking to take advantage of them. With those words she managed to touch the heart of a rocker who was really thinking about giving up, who surely wouldn't have done it, but who, faced with the frustration of losing what characterized her, the only thing she thought was good about her, had hit reality really hard to the point of realizing something as simple as that maybe her dreams really meant nothing in the face of the immensity of the world in front of her. However, now thanks to those words she had nothing to say. She didn't want to cry, she couldn't be weak in front of Midoriya, who had helped and supported her. She couldn't do anything but give him a silent, "Thanks for this Izuku," full of feelings, from frustration to genuine gratitude and joy that I had supported him at such a time. Unaware that what it took to return to normal was that self-confidence and ridding herself of the remorse of not having acted in critical moments like Midoriya had. A few more minutes passed between them, where they hugged and talked about things after parting ways, but one thing was clear to the aforementioned Midoriya: he was her true hero, although she wasn't going to tell him that for anything in the world. It took only a few weeks for her ability to play to return, thanking the aforementioned in a hidden and seemingly expressionless way, when in reality she was so grateful that she had found a new way to be inspired when playing or trying to write some song lyrics in general. The green-haired man, as strange as it might seem, although it was understandable, had become her new muse and inspiration, someone to truly admire. After that tender memory caused by her momentary emotions, the violet-haired girl couldn't help but feel somewhat frustrated. Since that day, since they had that close enough and had Midoriya's support, things had been less difficult for her. She was glad to have him by her side and to be able to share everything they shared in general, to the point of having many problems on some occasions due to situations like the ones they had on the first day of camp, among other diverse things. But now that I was about to spend more time with Mina, let's just say I wasn't entirely sure what might happen, and that wouldn't be a trivial matter, since the problems would start that very day. The small differences and situations that the aforementioned woman would not like at all, who tried to concentrate as best as possible, unconsciously thinking about the green-haired man, in order to continue with her normal thoughts and play normally. Something in her had been different since that moment, but until now she hadn't been able to recognize it on her own, but that wasn't all, and the problems that were coming would prove it to her. A few hours later, because Izuku started training with Mina, the girl had no one to train with, so now she asked 𝐴𝐻𝐼𝐴 to train with her, which the black-haired girl did, very happy that it was her who asked it and not someone else, as was the case with the annoying Mineta, the restless one. Sometimes too volatile Bakugo, although the latter only wanted to practice with her for her ability to create grenades, and he was currently training his ability to control his explosions and experimenting on his own. The power of certain explosives were good examples for him to improve that aspect of his gift. The girls headed to the space where everyone generally trained, something that they thought would make Aizawa angry because Jiro needed or had agreed to train with Midoriya, but upon noticing the presence of both he did nothing more than ask them to start training, which they did while they talked until they reached the place in question, where before starting they touched on a certain topic. Yaoyorozu equals tell me Kyoka-chan, in the end it's true, right? You really chose him over Kaminari. Although I am your friend, I must tell you that Midoriya is not someone who exactly shares your tastes, as is the case with Kaminari, who seems to be more knowledgeable about you in that aspect. Are you sure of what you're doing? The brunette mentioned in a completely indiscreet manner, waiting too attentively for the response of a violet-haired woman who could only blush at what her opponent said and start looking from side to side to avoid saying something stupid or showing herself expressive with someone closer who wasn't 𝐴𝐻𝐼𝐴. Jiro equals what the hell are you talking about, 𝐴𝐻𝐼𝐴? Exclamation mark. What do you think you're saying so suddenly and in such an indifferent and natural way, as if you were talking about something we mention all the time or something similar? Exclamation mark. The anger and disagreement with such a topic could be seen in Jiro's expression, who, although she showed that she was in total disagreement with what her opponent was saying, seemed angrier about something else that had nothing to do with the possible fact that what she mentioned was something foreign to what she thought or felt when the reality was somewhat different. Yaoyorozu equals I'm just saying Kyoka, you know I like it when you have great moments and I can't deny that seeing you blush like that is adorable, but it doesn't mean you should rush into such a decision. Do you even know how you feel about him? The black-haired woman implied that she was trying to hit some important point for her opponent to get the answer she wanted, but from the moment she had passed the initial impression, Jiro was much more focused and calmed down on her own to be able to respond with total indifference and ignorance on the subject. Jiro equals I'm sorry 𝐴𝐻𝐼𝐴, but I don't know anything about what you're mentioning, so I'd prefer that before touching on any subject we start training since we don't have much time, okay? The girl's way of expressing herself was clear. She did not want to waste time. Although her expression and tone expressed her implied indifference, the truth is that if Momo could read between the lines, which she did, she would understand that it was not the best thing to touch on such a subject at that time, less with what was happening with Mina, but she was unaware of that subject, although later she would see it for herself. 𝐽𝐼𝐴 equals I understand, I won't mention anything else. I quickly tried to lessen that threatening aura that was proving contrary to him with the intention of getting him to stop talking about it, or he could run a great risk and a very painful one. 𝐽𝐼𝐴 equals I didn't imagine that Midoriya would have you so interested as to behave aggressively and sharply with me. It's something that is not seen every day, less in you, at least not with me. A few last words between whispers, hoping now, maybe one last time, to touch some kind of nerve, something that apparently he managed to do. Jiro equals Momo doesn't. How could I like a fool who, instead of training with me like he said he would the day before, decides to go train with someone else as if she were that girl of greater importance or something similar? I'm not interested at all. Now, can we continue? Jiro had mentioned that, but without realizing that her tone of voice had become more annoyed and irritated than inexpressive or monotonous. But when Momo was about to reproach her, the person who should have been the least likely to appear at that moment arrived. Opening square bracket question mark closing square bracket. Equals oh, wow Jiro. You look amazing today, just like always, clearly. What are you doing training with Momo? What happened with Midoriya? Did he dump you so soon? That idiot doesn't know what he's missing, Jiro. Those words filled the glass of patience that the rocker possessed. She couldn't listen to another word about Midoriya, and that idiot had come to talk about it and saying something as stupid as that. Her reaction was not long in coming. She quickly placed herself right in front of the boy in question to stick her jacks in him and give him such a pulse that would leave him static in place for several hours, but before doing so she was interrupted by his pleas. Opening square bracket question mark closing square bracket. Equals wait Jiro, please. One moment, I just want to tell you that I want to train with you. You can start training with me tomorrow, and that way you won't have to do it all the time with Momo, who apparently was looking to train with Todoroki. I couldn't help but mention it out of fear, since I knew what the other side was capable of. Everything that came out of his mouth seemed like fallacies, but Jiro, when turning to see his friend Yaomomo, could notice that slight blush on her cheeks, making him understand that it was true. However, that did not mean that he would train with that imbecile, and he let him know in his own way, giving him a paralysis that would leave him still on the ground for a few hours while he spoke to him, observing him from above with a certain arrogance. Jiro equals first, no one has stood me up since, clearly as you know, I'm not dating Midoriya or anything like that. Second, I'm not interested in your training, I'll manage on my own. I prefer that 1,000 times to an idiot who only wanted to fight me to take advantage of situations and overstep his bounds. I hope you can rest a bit on the ground, and watch out for the ants. The girl quickly got rid of the boy to get away from him and go train with her partner, who watched the situation somewhat bewildered. Jiro's way of acting seemed much more confident than before, but, why or for whom? Hours later, dusk. After what happened, the violet-haired girl and the black-haired girl did not speak about the subject at any other time. The boy in question had not approached Kyoka anymore, who, upon returning, could only take a shower and change quickly, staying static for a few seconds in her dressing room thinking about what clothes would suit her best to look more flirtatious or attractive, something that was too rare for her, but she couldn't help but have the faint thought in her mind, even if it was subconsciously, that with a nice outfit she would make a certain boy realize what he had missed out on by going to train with someone else instead of her. It had all been unconscious, backing up his actions with words, I feel different today, I'll try something better. After getting dressed and looking at herself in the mirror, there was no mistaking her somewhat confident gaze. They were two beautiful garments, in addition to her underwear, of course. Her clothing was composed of something simple at first glance, a somewhat loose white flannel to avoid it squeezing her body and torso too much, leaving her build in certain areas to mere imagination, also avoiding the white color from revealing the color of her bra, and she was wearing short shorts. At first glance, It seemed normal, but if you took into account that Jiro didn't usually dress in such a revealing way, it would undoubtedly be impressive to many. The girl's legs were quite beautiful, they seemed to shine under the dim lighting of that complex. Without a doubt, they were beautiful legs that anyone who saw them would be quite restless for not being able to do anything else but stare at them. The rocker, happy with her decision, took her iPod, briefly remembering the days Midoriya had it, unable to think about whether he had really liked her music enough to ask for his iPod or if he had only done it because he didn't have one of his own. All doubts vanished when they saw the expression of the girl in question looking with some longing at the entrance door of the complex. Momo understood almost immediately that that outfit was a conscious or perhaps unconscious decision to catch someone's attention, but who? Their doubts were answered when they heard the door and found themselves with a scene that they couldn't describe. None really. The whole room that until a minute ago was full of noise even by the members of the 1B room had fallen into complete silence by the entrance of two individuals who made a little noise by the way in which they laughed at various comments, but the strange thing wasn't that, but who it was and in what situation. Pink-haired Mina Ashido was riding on the back of the supposedly shyest boy in the entire school, 𝐧𝐢𝐬𝐚 Midoriya, who was carrying her with his hands on the other girl's thighs while they talked and laughed about various things. Everyone was really impressed, although this was only on the part of Class 1B. Class 1A had mixed reactions: happiness, surprise, and, the one that seemed most hidden, jealousy. The boys in question, upon noticing that they were being watched, blushed a little, but Mina downplayed it and told Izuku to walk to his room so he could avoid walking as little as possible, while everyone just kept watching with total disbelief, not believing what their eyes were observing. A doubt flooded everyone's mind: what just happened? Jiro had a mixture of feelings and reactions that she couldn't explain. On one hand she seemed to feel hurt or sad for not being noticed by the green-haired boy, but on the other she was angry without knowing why, although those ideas quickly left her mind but not her heart when she heard and noticed a certain boy who without giving up approached her again as if he knew that this was the right time to try again, not knowing that even trying on that occasion he wouldn't really be able to get what he was looking for from that violet-haired girl. Opening square bracket question mark closing square bracket. Equals so it was for Mina-chan, I didn't think I could trade you for her. Don't forget that the proposal is still standing and I will keep insisting until you accept underscore the boy said as if he didn't care that he was rejected time and time again, even if it was through violence he didn't seem to care, while the aforementioned woman recomposed herself as best she could and indifferently contextualized what she could have said best to kill the situation there underscore. Jiro equals you talk too much for my taste Kaminari, you can save your nonsense for Mineta, because I can't stand it. Girls, see you tomorrow. I'm a little tired from today, I just came to say goodbye to you before going to sleep underscore. At first glance, all you could see was Jiro retreating normally, although Momo could feel how that retreat after dressing like that meant something more. Underscore. The violet-haired girl cut to the chase by not giving too much importance to that comment and also humiliating the blonde-haired boy little who, not expecting such an answer, had nothing to say and just stood expectantly watching Jiro leave with her classic indifference, but something was too clear, at least for Momo who noticed it fleetingly in Jiro's face. What had happened was enough to put the rocker in a bad mood and it would only be the beginning of that week, the first day, and it was already totally unbearable for her to see those friends. The week in question had been stressful for many in too many ways. The vast majority just felt somewhat pressured by training, but on the other hand there was the case of those who were dealing with the new situation. The truth was that seeing Midoriya and Mina together almost all the time after coming back from training, basically spending the whole day together. It wasn't exasperating or uncomfortable at all if you only looked at the fact that they had a strong commitment, but if you took the time to analyze everything carefully it was uncomfortable. That's only for those interested in the aforementioned, from Ashido, a Kirishima who at first only saw it as something temporary and irrelevant. However, now noticing the pink-haired girl so close to Izuku, and not only that but now she used to completely ignore the group of friends from before to spend time with Midoriya, this had caused Kirishima to somewhat realize his own feelings, which is why he had mentally prepared himself to ask Ashido to go out with him to train the next day since it was the beginning of the week and the odds dictated that she might be free. Kirishima couldn't get close to Mina all Saturday just like a certain girl couldn't get close to Izuku all day because Ashido seemed to have all of his attention, and when it seemed like that wasn't the case, she managed to do something or comment on something to get him to focus his attention on her again. Two girls seemed distressed by this and uncomfortable. Those were Uraraka and Jiro. Although both did not know why it exasperated them to see them, they simply did not want to pay attention to them. On the one hand, Uraraka simply went to her room saying that she felt somewhat bad, on Jiro's part, at one point where she noticed that Izuku was talking with that characteristic smile of his and normality with Mina. She could not stand it anymore and her patience ran out, causing her to get up suddenly from the place where she was, calling the attention of her close people who were Momo, Toru and Tsuyu. Each one had been doing her own thing, but due to Jiro's erratic and totally unexpected way of acting, they couldn't help but watch her as she walked away with her fists clenched at her sides. 𝐾𝐽 had spent the week quite tense, being more curt and cold than anyone could ever remember seeing her. However, that day seemed to be the straw that broke the camel's back, because while the girl was heading towards her room, she ran into a blonde who took advantage of having her in front of him to ask her one more question. Kaminari equals wait Jiro. I know you've been rejecting me all week, but since I mentioned it, I'm not going to give up, not even close. I really want a chance, so I'll ask you again and I'll continue until you accept. Could you give me the chance and train with me? I assure you that I won't let you down. His words seemed honest. Jiro was skeptical about the idea and Kaminari sensed what the answer would be. It was enough for him to say those words for the story between a certain pair to begin and give way to something that would be problematic for our protagonist. News: second week of training. It was Sunday, and Mina's week of training with our protagonist had just ended. Knowing what the day would be like and considering that he had to train with Jiro, he didn't hesitate to wake up in the best possible mood, fully prepared for the day. He had been talking so much and spending so much time with Ashido that he had ended up not having any kind of opportunity to talk or chat about anything, even music, with Jiro. The positive side was that now that he had finished his training with her, he could train peacefully alongside 𝐾𝐽. Something he had been truly looking forward to, because being with the violet-haired girl was a sea of joy and constant improvement, where both of them gave their best to improve, and due to their very similar tastes in music it was only natural that they got along when training, giving it a different air than the one he had when he trained with his classmate and now best friend Mina Ashido. Midoriya got up and dressed quickly after clearly bathing. Once ready and with all his implements ready, he was about to leave his room. But before doing so he remembered to take something very important, that iPod without an All Might design, which was very rare for the aforementioned. However, he carried it because of its symbolism and how important it was to him, only because it had been given to him by Jiro, who at the right time gave it to him, saying that it was necessary for the latter so that he would at least have something that would not focus on the design of All Might, his idol. That iPod had taken care of him like nothing else, and every time he trained with 𝐾𝐽 or felt a little discouraged, he would look at that device and start listening to the music that the girl in question had recommended, or simply his favorite musical genre, which was similar to ballads due to the speed of the songs and other specific points. He was just listening to one of the songs that Jiro had recommended to him while dancing to the rhythm of that wonderful guitar accompanied by magnificent drums. The boy with his iPod in hand and his small white headphones that came with the iPod did not hesitate to enjoy as it should be that song called My Demons, as he began to head towards Jiro's room to wake her up, thinking about what they would do when they started doing exercises while he went towards his destination. When he arrived he was about to knock, but he heard something in the kitchen that caught his attention, making him go to it, although in reality it hadn't been in the kitchen but in the living room. The problem was that said kitchen was located almost in the living room, so it couldn't be differentiated too much, and since the walls didn't seem to be exactly noise-proof or insulating in a somewhat necessary way, it ended up being of no use. Once in the room, Izuku could see that noise was making that caught his attention and that he had defined as the sound of some kind of animal, but it wasn't that but something more humble. It was his companion 𝐾𝐽, who was next to the blonde, who did nothing but yawn, perhaps due to tiredness or simply because he was not used to being awake so early. Midoriya didn't realize something important, and on impulse he approached the violet-haired girl as calmly as possible, or so he imagined, when in truth he had basically crossed the 10 meters of distance they had between them to be 1.5 meters away from the girl, to ask her with his spirits through the roof, knowing that she will be training with his partner and friend Jiro. Izuku equals wow. Jiro-chan, you woke up pretty early on your own. Are you all ready for today's TR training? I didn't thou. Izuku looked like a kid in a candy store. His eyes shone with an intensity that seemed inextinguishable. It was kind of cute to see him so excited about training, but Jiro had a certain expression that said something wasn't quite right and tried to mention it to Midoriya as gently as possible just in case. 1. Jiro equals Izuku. The truth is that I don't know how to tell you. Since you were training with Mina, I was waiting for us to be able to train, but before the week could end it happened that the rocker tried to explain as calmly as possible to avoid anything negative happening to Midoriya, but she was interrupted by the boy at her side who made a daring move with his left arm, surrounding the neck of the aforementioned girl and then addressing Izuku with some superiority, and it could even be called bragging. Kaminari equals I'm sorry Midoriya, but Jiro can't attend training with you. She will start training with me starting today, therefore I recommend you start training on your own, because from what the people who were training with you have told me, it seems that all of you found someone to train with. It's a shame for you Izuku, but a shrimp that falls asleep is carried away by the current. They were words that at first glance were simple to process, however, upon hearing them our green-haired boy only remained static for a few seconds, wondering if what was said was true, giving a slight glance to Jiro who was next to the boy in question, noticing that she didn't say anything, just kept her gaze in any direction that wasn't his. Being another Izuku, Midoriya would undoubtedly have responded to what he was doing or at least acted in some way, however he couldn't help but think that doing so, even if he felt uncomfortable because of that closeness, would only cause everyone to feel uncomfortable or think badly of his actions. Izuku equals I didn't mean to bother you. Sorry Jiro-chan and Kaminari-kun, I'm leaving. He didn't speak in a different way than he normally did, just a little more nervous, thinking that he had interrupted them in some way, although he couldn't deny that seeing them together and knowing that they would train was something a bit unexpected. But what did have him more doubtful was what had been said regarding the rest of his teammates. If it was true it wouldn't bother him, he just had to train alone, it's not like it was the first time. Midoriya, after saying that and without giving anyone a chance to say anything else, simply moved quickly to his room for who knows what. Those present upon noticing this just left the place. Jiro for his part observed the boy's reaction and couldn't help but think while he looked in another direction when Denki mentioned that they were going to train together, and he took the news normally as if it were something everyday. At least try to ask me or try something. When dealing with thoughts in the middle of important dialogues or actions, they will now be written that way. She knew it was a banal and selfish thought, but she really wished that Izuku had at least approached her or protested about it. He just took it calmly and left the place as if he was afraid of Denki or her. That thought made her feel insecure again, even if it was only inside. Therefore, she decided to discard what had happened and continue with her day with the blonde, who seemed happier than usual, perhaps for having managed to get Midoriya away from his supposed partner, or so he thought. Our protagonist had left the place as quickly as possible. He couldn't think clearly. He could feel how a few moments ago he was about to respond rudely to Denki because of the tone he was using with him and the presumptuous way in which he was speaking, as if it were the best achievement to train alongside Jiro. The boy was just seconds away from saying the words to him. I understand, but it's good for you to have the consolation prize, Denki. She didn't understand where such reasoning had come from, but the positive side was that she had avoided it completely. Now she had to head towards her normal training place, and then she would return to check if her training partners had woken up to find out if what Kaminari had said was true. It was better to confirm than to fail clumsily or assume things because of the blonde in question. He quickly left the place but through the back to head towards his training place. When he was alone and training on his own, he had left through the back to avoid running into Jiro and Kaminari. He still felt foolish for having had in mind to say that to the aforementioned, so he preferred to avoid them so as not to feel sorry or ashamed. Having arrived at the training place very quickly and in the shortest possible time thanks to his new way of using one for all that was not yet perfected, he did not hesitate to begin training as if he were being guided by his own sensations. He could not notice it, but he had some discomfort inside, perhaps because of what happened a few minutes ago. The next symbol of peace was training on a cliff, the very one he had seen the first time, but why in that place? Due to the height and the view of the place, it was much easier to see the entire forest, and it was useful for him to be able to visualize the entire territory. that way it was only necessary for him to start his new routine to train the control of One for All as it is distributed evenly throughout his body, so that a part of his body cannot be broken by using it without taking into account the possibility of damage it would cause to the thing that moves or to his body itself. With his power activated, he throws himself towards the forest with great precision, falling on the top of a tree. After this he began his training. Quickly and precisely he began to jump from tree to tree in a synchronized manner and without failing, making his instincts, senses and muscles get used to the constant movement with that way of using his gift, something that he was slowly achieving. That way of moving was quite good to take full advantage of his speed and reaction, because being able to jump on many surfaces consecutively managed to give him too much information to examine the rival, in addition to the fear of not knowing exactly where you were if you used this type of movement properly, and that was what he was training in addition to the resistance of this way of moving, which he achieved with relative ease, but he still got tired somewhat quickly. 2 hours later, after jumping from tree to tree, even between their branches and trunks, in order to train how to mislead his opponent in the best possible way, also taking advantage of factors such as moving close to the ground at tremendous speed to raise a bit of dust, although this did depend on the surface on which he would fight, but by doing so in that forest he already had enough ideas to fight properly in it and ensure victory. What he hadn't noticed was that from jumping around in different directions, he'd gotten a little out of the space he'd memorized for training, reaching a certain area of the forest where, apparently, some moans of pain or something similar could be heard briefly and almost for an instant. Midoriya thought it was an animal in danger or hurt, so his body moved on its own to see what it was and help if necessary. After crossing a series of bushes he reached a certain point where his senses managed to warn him in time, causing him to hide behind a trunk, preventing him from being seen by the individuals in that clearing who had been making that kind of meaningless noise that he hadn't taken into account could be something else. Izuku was somewhat confused by what he heard, but when he peeked out to see in a covert way, what he noticed left him with his mouth open. Jiro, Kaminari, what are you doing? Second week of training, forest near the complex. Midoriya couldn't properly analyze what he was observing. It was something he didn't expect to notice under any circumstances, something that no matter how much he might observe time after time, the surprise and impression would remain the same. He couldn't believe what his eyes were seeing. For a second he even thought it had been his imagination, but it wasn't. What exactly was our protagonist seeing? The answer had to be explained by recapitulating a few minutes before, but from the point of view of those involved, Jiro, 𝐶𝐞𝐫𝐞 and Denki Kaminari, who at that moment found themselves in that compromising position. Minutes antes, 𝐶𝐞𝐫𝐴. The violet-haired girl was training with the guy who seemed the most annoying to her in her class, although not more than Mineta, but she could assure that she disliked him enough to occasionally or almost all of the time continue hurting him because of the stupid things he said and did. Although at that time they were training together for a particular reason, he had always been requesting her to train with him since the moment his partner and friend Izuku had stopped training with her to do it with Mina Ashido. The girl had been able to reject him as many times as possible, until she could notice a certain tenderness in his actions. In addition to the fact that his indecencies had decreased considerably, he was not so vulgar when asking her to train, nor did he insinuate something else while he could or when acting friendly with her. He had only become somewhat possessive when Midoriya was involved. But that had only happened on one occasion, where he even put his left arm around her to prevent the boy from getting close to her, or perhaps to show that he was with the girl in question, something that apparently had not angered the aforementioned girl, who was only somewhat worried about what had happened. Kaminari was really happy to be able to practice alongside his opponent since he had been insisting on too many occasions. Luckily for him, the opportunity to separate Jiro and Midoriya had appeared thanks to Mina's interference in their apparent friendship by monopolizing the green-haired boy for herself the entire past week, and that had helped him to have Jiro available most of the time and try incessantly to get her to accept his request to train with him. He had even made the sacrifice of changing his way of expressing himself a little towards her to avoid making her uncomfortable or making her think he was a pervert, which he was. That way he could perhaps get her to accept him, and although the task was almost impossible, he seemed to have achieved it, and so it was. Now they were training due to his cunning and persistence. He felt proud of himself. He knew that a shy green-haired fool could not take him away, or girl. However, it seems that victory hadn't been enough for him, and he was looking for a way to further destroy the apparent closeness between them in order to prevent any possible rapprochement. The Pikachu, no matter how stupid he seemed and was quite capable of causing enmity, taking advantage of his position as Kyoka's best friend, although this position gradually began to seem more unreal due to the little time they spent together from the moment in which the girl began to spend time with Midoriya, something that he had not noticed until the camp began, and at that moment he noticed it for the first time. Jiro's gaze and her aptitude when standing next to the aforementioned man were nothing compared to the closeness she felt towards him. At first, it seemed like a mere coincidence, but as time went by, she couldn't help but notice all the clear points she managed to gather to draw such a conclusion, and she would take advantage of those blind spots, or rather, those jealousies he seemed to have. A girl to get as far away from the green-haired boy as possible. That's exactly what he was doing during his training while attacking Jiro hand to hand and dodging her jacks as much as possible. While he managed to trap her in a key by taking her arms and placing them behind her back to prevent her from moving, pressing her fingers on the girl's jacks to prevent her from hitting him or stabbing him with them, he didn't hesitate to ask her while he had her temporarily subdued. Girl. 𝐴 What's wrong, Jiro? Am I stronger than Midoriya, or did he let you win because he thought you were weaker than other girls? If I'm honest, seeing him with Mina for so long last week was quite strange. Did he change you because he thought you were weak? The blonde's words were annoying and full of poison for the violet-haired girl who tried not to give in to them, but what he was saying in part she felt was true. Her insecurity was not great when it came to trivial or crucial issues, however when it came to Midoriya she seemed to be less capable of having that impregnable security that she possessed. Jiro. What are you talking about while we train? Are you jealous that I'm close to Midoriya and that's why you're bothering me? Come on, you idiot, you're not able to think straight and you're seeing things where they aren't there. His attitude towards Kaminari was challenging and always showing superiority, but he couldn't help but feel that what the other said was partly true, perhaps if he had changed him for Mina because he wasn't strong or capable enough. Denki. So am I seeing this wrong? Great, because I really thought you were his girlfriend or something. You'd been seeing him for too long and I thought it was weird. It's a good thing because I think he's going to confess to Mina. She had just thrown a bomb at the violet-haired girl who had stopped struggling when she said that. Her insecurities were now making themselves felt, but they were not enough to stop her. Quickly and with some anger she took control using her jacks, managing to free one to stick it in her opponent's right arm and managing to free herself from his grip to attack him, crashing him into the ground and placing herself on top of him. Jiro. Will you continue focusing on someone unimportant until the end of the fight, or will you fight like a man, Pikachu? If you can't, that only means that you are not even an iota of what Midoriya is. Those words had escaped him due to the intensity of the moment, and what was being that conversation in the middle of a fight now had him immobilized with its jacks nailed to both arms, causing the constant sound of them inside his limbs to keep him static and inert for the most part, something that he hated, and he couldn't help but click his teeth. Denki. TKs. Shit, so I was right. You like Midoriya and you can't deny it. There's a reason you're constantly mentioning him. How can you like someone like him? His annoying questions began to have an effect on the aforementioned woman with increasing force, to the point that she was quite angry about them and unconsciously began to simply deny the matter in order to avoid continuing with such a conversation. Jiro. I don't like him. I could never like someone like him. He's not my type. You're just seeing things that aren't true. I can't like someone like him and I couldn't even try to like him. She had mentioned that while her voice seemed to tense up and something inside her began to break little by little with each time she denied feeling something for the boy, something that she didn't know at that point if she did, but the tension of the moment prevented her from listening with her jacks to the person who was watching them attentively, almost totally incredulous about what he was hearing. Denki. How can you say that you don't even like him? Weren't you friends, or was I wrong about that too? Given your closeness, if you are friends, it won't be long before you fall in love with him and Izuku rejects you for who you are or how you are. Will you take that risk? Despite being pressured and hurt by the pulsations of the sonic waves in his arms, he was not going to give up. If he could get her to admit that she didn't want anything with him or something superior, it would be excellent, since he could use that to make her realize that she didn't have to expect anything from him. Jiro. Everything remained silent for a few seconds. The violet-haired woman quickly got up from on top of the blonde man to stand just a few feet away from him. Her gaze was directed toward the ground, covered by her silky, well-kept hair, but the words she spoke would weigh too heavily on her at that time. Jiro. equals Midoriya. He's not my friend, I can't even say that I know him, we only talked a couple of times, but nothing more, he's just a boy in my class, just another classmate underscore. It might sound rude, however, it was what she wanted to believe despite the tears in her eyes that went completely unnoticed, running down her cheeks and reaching her neck, but she didn't expect what would happen next. Underscore. Back to the present. The sounds from before did not come from an animal but from Kaminari's moans as he was subdued before Jiro, who a second ago had just mentioned those words. He had managed to hear everything he said, absolutely everything, but the last thing was what had the greatest impact on him, and not only that, it managed to disturb him to the point of making him feel like when he was little again. Immediately memories of his childhood came to him, that time when he was nothing and nobody, when he didn't have a quirk and everyone pointed at him as someone weak and useless who could never achieve his dream. Without realizing it, she was watching 𝐾𝐽 with her gaze lost in infinity, ending up pronouncing those words that a somewhat calmer Jiro was able to say now, and that due to the boy's tone of voice it was not difficult at all to hear him and turn to look at him. His words did not coincide with his sad expression and somewhat lost in his thoughts, but they were clear enough to make it clear what the effect of those words was. Underscore. So it's true. I was never your friend, Jiro-chan? Underscore. The atmosphere suggested what it was like to witness such a scene. The two boys who had been talking were now completely silent. Kaminari had nothing to say. This time, something had come out that wasn't exactly his plan, but things couldn't have played out better for him. But Jiro was totally restless, uncomfortable and surprised. On the one hand, she had not heard Izuku's footsteps or presence at any time, and what made her feel the worst was the fact that she had uttered such words that did not represent or say an iota of what she truly felt. However, he had already said them, and before he could retract them, the green-haired man simply left the place as quickly as he could, hurrying his pace to the point of even using his one for all to get out of there, leaving only a large trail of dust and nothing else. Once the trail of dust had completely subsided, Jiro found herself frustrated, angry, and sad. She couldn't express all the anger she felt and all the frustration she had inside. She had just destroyed a friendship that wasn't just that, but little by little, it had become more for her. As if that weren't enough, she had just ended up clearly hurting her best friend, and apparently the boy she was interested in. Izuku kept moving away from that place, even reaching the complex, his gaze still lowered as he fled to his room. He didn't know at what point he had ended up approaching the complex or at what point he ended up inside the same place where there weren't many people due to the time and the fact that training was currently taking place. The few who were able to see him standing there at the entrance, tears falling from his eyes, were quite peculiar and worried everyone who knew him, and even a little bit those who were simply from the other class. Todoroki was nearby, having returned to the complex in search of his cell phone, as he and his father were working on a way to control a certain movement he would begin to use with his fire side. He didn't expect to find himself in such a complicated scene. Izuku couldn't help but feel like he was in the past. Those memories suddenly dislocated him, making him see himself as he was during his time at school. The half and half tried to approach the aforementioned, who, upon getting close enough and noticing that he was watching him, did nothing but run again, but this time towards his room, ignoring all possible calls from his classmates or someone else. Aizawa had appreciated this, and upon noticing his student's behavior he said nothing more than, "Leave him alone, he'll recover from whatever happened to him." That way of thinking might have been a bit wrong for some, but it was true. They couldn't just walk up to his room and insist until he let them in. They had to give him space to recover from whatever had happened. After all, Midoriya wasn't someone who suffered a lot from things that happened to him, or so they thought, clearly ignoring the fact that the green-haired man had a certain past that, due to what happened, would now be more present in his daily life than one could expect or take into account. Deku moved as quickly as he could until he reached his room and entered it with heaviness in his feet and a clearly lost look. Without much else to think or do, he just fell on his bed with great frustration in his mind. Izuku couldn't understand what had happened. He couldn't imagine that Jiro had really said that she was never his friend, and that, to top it all off, he never liked her. That was what made him the most angry and made him feel extremely bad that she had said things like, "I could never like it," or so. It didn't hurt him that much, just a little bit, thinking that she saw him that way, but that she had accepted it in front of Kaminari, not that she had said on her own that she wasn't his friend, had been enough to hit him in such a way that he couldn't take into account what was happening. Memories from long ago continued to come to his mind, clouding his vision, causing him to only be able to remember in a scarce and ephemeral way how his dream had been shattered previously, although everything had turned out well later. What would have happened if everything hadn't turned out the way it did? For the first time, Midoriya questioned himself about whether he would really have been able to fulfill his dream even without a 𝐽𝐽, all of this caused by a regression of memories caused by appreciating such a scene. Now he couldn't count on Jiro, the cause of that problem, someone he not only considered a great friend, but a great source of support for himself and someone he loved spending a lot of time with. It had all been just a game or something similar for her. After all the time that had passed, Izuku Midoriya continued to be the Deku that 𝐽𝐽 had placed on him, just a useless one. 2 days after the incident, second week of training. Everything seemed certainly strange in the complex, at least in the part of room 1A. After all, after the previous events, everyone was somewhat tense by the fact that the light of the class, the student who with his characteristic way of being managed to change all kinds of environments and make everyone get along even if it was in a totally indirect way just by being present and being as nervous as he was at times. Now everything had vanished with the simple fact that he was not present, almost as if the most essential part of the entire course had disappeared. He had been exactly 2 whole days without leaving that room, something that made many worry about what it could mean, but before they did anything they were immediately rejected by Midoriya inside his room, who only said, "Don't worry about me, just leave me alone, Izuku's behavior was in no way exemplary of a hero capable of recovering from all kinds of difficulties. That seemed even more critical to them, if what had happened was strong enough to put Izuku in such a state. Who had endured the psychological pressure of the attack of the League of Villains, constantly breaking his bones, being considered someone who due to his strong gift could not use it properly without breaking his bones, and that made it impossible for him to be a hero among many other things, but who had managed to overcome all that with his iron determination and dream. What exactly had happened to put him in such a state? That was the question that everyone in that place couldn't help but ask themselves. But one thing was somewhat clear. The only person who didn't go to mention anything to him or try to fix something or convince him had been Jiro, since she did understand what had happened and preferred to stay out of it. However, for her part, she had also felt horrible thinking that everything that had happened was her fault. She couldn't imagine what their relationship would be like once the green-haired boy left that room. What will happen to Midoriya? That was everyone's doubt, but what they didn't take into account was that a certain pink-haired girl had achieved something important, thanks to the mere fact of knocking on his door and saying a few words to him that same day, achieving something that no one had achieved. Basically making Deku not try to simply silence the sound of someone's voice outside by throwing a pillow at the door or just politely asking him to stop until the person in question did. Ishido showed her determination and commitment to keeping her teammate and best friend cheerful at all costs. She didn't like seeing Izuku so sad at all and would do whatever it took to cheer him up, since she was fascinated by his smile just as he seemed to like hers. Mine equals Midoriya. Get out of that room once and for all. Stop tormenting yourself for whatever happened. You are someone strong, a future hero, not to mention that you could perhaps become better than many of those present in this training camp. Therefore, stop being so delicate and behave like who you really are. Izuku Midoriya, the next symbol of peace. Mina's words had no greater value than sentimental at first glance. Many who heard her, by the way she shouted, would think that she was just exaggerating, but others understood in a certain way what she was talking about. It was about the boy who had managed to help them during the attack of the League of Villains, who had misled the creature that was about to kill his teacher. Among other things, he had even stood up to the Nomu that cost All Might so much work to defeat. If someone had the true heart and the innate ability to become the best hero, it was the future symbol of peace. Izuku Midoriya, called Deku by 𝐽𝐽 and his best friend Uraraka, who had apparently given it a new meaning. Izuku was behind that door just listening to what his best friend was telling him. It was true. He couldn't stay downcast just because of past traumas that were now on the surface. He more than anyone had to make an effort to control his power, the power that was entrusted to him to become the future symbol of peace. He had to do whatever was necessary to achieve it, and if to do so he needed to ignore what had happened or overcome his past traumas, he would do it without hesitation. A few more seconds were necessary for Midoriya to open the door of that room and leave it, not without first smiling at Ishido, who could only blush at such a gesture. There was the smile of the boy that made him so happy, and that although he did not want to admit it, it was the smile that he liked and made him strive harder than many lately. just for the fact of being able to continue training by his side, just for the reason of wanting to be at his level and to be able to continue by his side. Clearly, she had no idea that those were her feelings. They were deep inside her, but they remained the solid foundation of her feelings, foundations that wouldn't change. After giving Mina a sincere and grateful smile, Midoriya didn't hesitate to go back into the room, change, and come out in his training clothes, after showering, of course. Once ready, he was accompanied by Mina to the living room where everyone was waiting for him, changed or at least with a sad, affected expression. The most distressed for many reasons was Jiro, who couldn't even look at him. Standing in front of everyone, Izuku bowed in apology and spoke to everyone with his characteristic smile, the one capable of transmitting security, peace, and many other positive emotions, even motivating them that day. 𝐬𝐧𝐿, I'm sorry if I worried you guys. I assure you all that it won't happen again. It was just some personal problems, nothing out of the ordinary. From now on I will continue to strive, since it's unfair that I aim to try to be the future symbol of peace without trying much harder than the rest. Those words were tender, full of spirit and without any nerves. That gave some curiosity, not to say much, impression to most of those present. On previous occasions when he apologized he trembled and became sad almost to the point of tears, but now he had a strange aura of confidence, although this was not entirely stable, not to say that it could only be a temporary mask. Todoroki = don't worry Midoriya, we only did what a friend should do, so now that you're okay you can continue training. I understand better than anyone that your desire is stronger than any hardship or pain. Just as you supported me in the past, I am here for you. The tone of voice used was subtle and soft, leaving aside his almost expressionless face, making Izuku understand that he would truly be with him no matter what. He still had too much respect for him for helping him in the sports festival to use all his power and understand that it was his. That side of fire was his and no one else's. Bakugo = what's wrong with you, you fucking nerd? Do you think you're cool or something just for walking out of a fucking room? Stop trying to look amazing, you bastard. The meaning of his words was basically that he had worried about him but said it in his own way, although he could never accept this, since he was the shitty nerd he was talking about. He couldn't do anything but insult him like the rest because that's what he deserved. The other classmates just told him that he didn't have to worry about anything. Izuku was happy to have such good classmates, but he immediately thought about what had happened, what was keeping him locked in his room, and right there it was. His reason. The violet-haired girl at the back of the room initially thought about approaching her to apologize for her actions, since he wanted to be a little mature about that matter, and if he really thought that he wasn't his friend it was fine. But when their eyes met and he was about to approach while smiling warmly, he noticed how Kaminari stood next to Jiro, taking her with his left arm again around the neck. It was clear the message that he wanted to give her, basically a stay away, that only the innocent Midoriya couldn't understand. He simply stayed away because it made him somewhat uncomfortable. Kyoka had seen Midoriya's smile for a moment and couldn't help but blush clearly on her face, thinking that he didn't hate her for what had happened and that he was still able to smile that way. It kept her very happy and positive. She would only tell him that it had been a misunderstanding, but when she was about to approach him she was taken by Denki, which angered her somewhat obviously. However, before she could say anything to him, Kaminari pointed at a certain spot as he said, "That's why he left." The blonde pointed to the pink-haired girl, who was happy and cheerful, filling all her classmates with encouragement, along with Midoriya, who only smiled a little and laughed at the way of being of his best friend, who, taking advantage of the moment, did not hesitate to hug the green-haired girl, blushing a little. But for Jiro this was a pretty clear blow to his feelings. He couldn't watch that scene anymore. For the first time, his feelings weren't manifesting themselves unconsciously. He was aware of her. He was jealous of Mina. He couldn't fully explain them, but now he partially understood what he felt, even if only a little. Without much else to do, Izuku was about to ask Ashido to train with him again, but she quickly mentioned her training that day. "I have to train with Kirishima." It was true. The redhead had requested it since Sunday morning, and she accepted because she really needed to fight against that kind of opponents who, due to her gift such as Kirishima's hardening, would not be totally affected by her blows or her acid. Deku laughed and felt his insecurities on the surface. They hadn't gone away at all. They were stronger and more present than ever, so he simply stated that it would be best for her to then leave, but not before leaving, seeing a certain peculiar scene for him that made him feel extremely uncomfortable, much more than Jiro with Kaminari. And this was a Uraraka who had apparently not worried about Izuku's condition, next to an Iida who had not worried about it either. Our protagonist associated that with his training, so he simply left the place saying goodbye to everyone with his big smile. When he crossed the exit door and entered the forest, his smile disappeared completely. His tears were on his face instead, and it was not surprising. He was really bad. He had only left that room so as not to worry Mina, and because he thought that by training, maybe, just maybe, he could calm down and push those insecurities out of his mind, those memories that bothered him so much and caused feelings he had no intention of feeling or expressing. He simply wanted his entire past to return to where it was before, in the deepest recesses of his memory, but he wouldn't know how impossible this would be for him. 2 days later, second week of training. Our protagonist was extremely frustrated, and it wasn't something out of this world. After all, he was angry because his insecurities didn't seem to go away. They were still there. He continued thinking about what happened with Jiro, and somehow he also associated what happened with Mina, who was training with Kirishima, and he couldn't help but ask himself the doubt that little by little hurt him more and more. Does Ishido-chan consider me her friend? Although during the time they spent together on the last day of his training at night, he had asked him not to hold a grudge against him and to please not return everything to normal when the week ended, making him understand that he really wanted to have his friendship, but due to the rebirth of his insecurity, he couldn't help but think that everything could only turn out to be an elaborate plan to cause him problems or take advantage of him, perhaps even just for some kind of interest. He was really lost in his own thoughts to the point that many of his companions noticed that he wasn't at his best, but he had something positive. He had managed to control a relatively important percentage of one for all when driving it throughout his body. It was about 20%, but it was a more than notable and important improvement. Izuku continued thoughtful in the same place he had been the last few days, sitting on that cliff, or rather on that crag of the forest, where he could appreciate the entire expanse of it, still remembering his past, something that bothered him immensely, but more for itself than for anything else. It angered him a little knowing that he had always been naive when dealing with people, when he could have calmly gotten away from everyone instead of insisting on making friends. But what the hell was I thinking? Just those kinds of thoughts didn't make sense to him. He would never be someone who saw the world, or that the solutions were of that nature of giving up on others or similar. He just needed time to go back to being the same as before. He repeated that constantly, and without realizing it, noon had arrived. It was 12 o'clock, and that day he had been summoned by Professor Aizawa, along with the rest of the students in his class, to a combat test that would be held between them. The participants were all outside the complex, in a rather large clearing where there was a wide platform at least 50 meters wide and long, quite attractive to the eye. Aizawa equals the fights will take place here. I hope everyone is prepared for them and has not overexerted themselves lately so that they can give their best in these. I will proceed to mention the participants of each fight. It will be as follows, and they will only fight once. Whether they win or lose, a particular evaluation will be made for each participant. Bakugo vs Todoroki, Ishido vs Toru, Mineta vs Jiro, Ojiro vs Tokiami, Tsuyu vs Zero, Kirishima vs Sato, Yaoyorozu vs Koda, and Kaminari vs Midoriya. Without further ado, prepare for your fights. They will fight in the order given _. Those fights had been decided, but what they didn't take into account were the possible outcomes of them and what the last fight meant. Many didn't take it into account. Even Jiro took away all his vitality. He was only worried about Midoriya's condition, without knowing that Kaminari was about to cause a big inconvenience in the camp by touching certain nerves of a participant, causing something that could have been avoided if he had only kept his mouth shut. The fights went on normally. Bakugo won his fight against Todoroki again, like at the festival, but this time it was more hard-fought. Ishido easily defeated Toru. Jiro defeated Mineta as if it were nothing. Tokiami had no problems defeating Ojiro. Tsuyu had difficulties but managed to beat Jiro, and Kirishima did not have it so complicated against his rival. Yaoyorozu easily defeated Koda. The final fight was about to take place, and everyone was calm, watching it with some expectations, not knowing what that fight was about to show them. Sometimes things don't go as expected. Second week of training, final combat. Izuku Midoriya stood on the same platform as Kaminari Denki, carefully observing his opponent, although by Aizawa's instructions they had to approach to make a friendly greeting before starting. The fight was normal, without any restrictions. They could use their gifts freely, although what everyone expected from it was that Izuku would lose the fight. The reason? Since he had no control over his quirk, he couldn't use it against Kaminari, since doing so would only hurt his partner, and the members of Room 1A knew that he wasn't capable of such a thing, much less putting his partner's life at stake for a fight, even if it was a test. However, A certain pink-haired girl didn't agree with what most of her classmates were whispering, who immediately wondered why, to which the girl responded by mentioning that they had no idea about Midoriya's improvements. Those words, as simple as they seemed, managed to bring a smile to 𝐴-chan's serious and annoyed face. Even if it was a grim smile, it was a smile after all. While the rest of the students remained uncertain about Deku, none of those present could even imagine what that fight would bring. Simple, but easy, at first glance. Izuku approached Denki as the teacher indicated to perform the happy friendly greeting. He didn't have much knowledge regarding how the yellow-haired boy could try to face him, but that was left in the background due to a word he left in the air while shaking the green-haired boy's hand. Words that emotionally unbalanced Midoriya in the middle of that fight, leaving him standing in the middle of the platform with his hand extended in the place where he had previously been shaking Denki's hand. He was like that for a few seconds. Now the other guy had returned to his place, but Izuku remained static at that point. Professor Aizawa didn't know what had happened because he couldn't hear whatever Kaminari mentioned to Deku, who was totally still, almost as if they had told him something he didn't expect, or as if he knew something that they didn't, and that was what had affected young Midoriya. That mystery had him somewhat puzzled and angry, but it was only a matter of time before he discovered what it was about and could find a way to solve the isolated behavior our protagonist had been exhibiting lately, being more cautious and somewhat more tense than usual, as if he suspected everyone or something similar. All of Izuku's classmates only saw him standing in the middle of the platform with his hand extended in a place where there was nothing before. Some thought about saying something to Midoriya to get him out of his trance, but before doing so they noticed how the boy's extended hand, which was the left one, clenched to the point of taking the shape of a fist, one that seemed to tremble a little, perhaps from the force exerted or from nerves, ignoring the serious look that Izuku had at that moment after such words. Since Midoriya wasn't a violent person, they assumed it was just nerves or tiredness building up in his limbs. The green-haired boy withdrew from the center of the battlefield, his gaze seemingly lost, and from one moment to the next he began to mutter, which was normal for him. In fact, he had stopped doing so since what happened with Jiro. But his classmates weren't the only ones who noticed this change, their teacher as well. However, seeing him mutter again as if he were a machine gun was a positive thing, right? The freckled man was muttering too quickly. He was analyzing every possible scenario that would arise in that fight, how he should confront his opponent, and other necessary things for the confrontation. Many would think that it was not necessary, but Izuku was very cautious when fighting against anyone. Therefore he had first decided that he should get used to the opponent's attack rhythm and measure his resistance to blows by hitting him with his quirk and gradually increasing his strength and speed in general when he applies one for all evenly in percentages that would increase little by little. Once he found his opponent's exact limit, he would take advantage of that to be able to fight calmly, maintaining that percentage, although his intention was to finish the fight while he obtained sufficient information about his opponent and how far he had reached the use of his gift. Jiro, for her part, watched everything that was happening from a distance from the stage. She had a bad feeling. She was worried about Deku since she knew that he still didn't have good control of his gift, while Kaminari had been training with her and had become quite good at using his electricity. In addition to managing to fire an immense amount of volts repeatedly before becoming completely like an idiot, I couldn't help but think that this fight would be a defeat for Izuku, or, failing that, he would end up winning but breaking his bones. Aizawa. You have to give your best, but Midoriya, I warn you. You won't be able to use your quirk if you're not sure you won't break any bones, because we haven't brought Recovery Girl with us because she works at the institute as such. So both of you avoid major injuries like breaking a bone or similar, especially you, Midoriya. His words were orders. For a second everyone thought that the fight had reached that point except for two people who knew more or less what that rule would mean in the development of the fight. They were protecting Izuku, or so it seemed at first glance, when for another person it was something more. Midoriya was so lost in those words spoken by his rival that he had ended up not listening to anything at all of what his teacher said, and before he realized it the fight started with his own words, begin. Anyone would dare to think that the fight could be decided from the start, but Izuku would be in charge of closing many mouths and cycles in that fight. Denki was sure that his words would have been enough to psychologically affect the opponent. It was a dirty measure, but the best way to defeat his opponent, pass the test and shine in front of fair girl. Quickly the yellow-haired boy began to run towards Izuku, cutting their distance from 40 meters to a mere 5 meters in just 50 seconds. For some it was a good speed, for our protagonist it was too slow, But he was not entirely stupid. That apparent direct attack that the opponent was carrying out was nothing more than a simple feint. The boy could notice how Kaminari intentionally placed his left hand behind his body in a very well disguised way to avoid being seen, the reason for that direct attack. Midoriya charged forward seemingly at the same speed, but when he was 1 meter away he noticed how Denki used a quick movement with his left hand to touch the ground as quickly as possible, emitting a discharge that had been accumulating. The problem was that in the first instance the ground would not have conducted the electricity as well, but the platform was not made of concrete or cement. It was made of metal for aesthetic reasons, or perhaps to prevent it from being easily destroyed, which prevented the Bakugo vs Todoroki fight from being responsible for destroying the platform in question. The voltage the boy had thrown at that conductive support, being metal, was 700 volts, enough to cause paralysis in the human body for several minutes. Izuku was able to notice his idea before he could use it. Making use of his speed and reaction, he jumped with force, taking off 2 meters from the ground without using his quirk, which showed how well his body and reflexes were trained, thus managing to avoid the boy's discharge that would have covered almost the entire platform, a real danger to fight against a Kaminari on a metal surface. Despite this, our protagonist wasn't so worried today. He felt tense and anxious, although this was for another reason. Being in the air thanks to the aerial position he had obtained by jumping from so many trees, managing to stay in the air longer or giving the impression that he was hanging there, he didn't hesitate to attack Denki, who hadn't expected such agility from the green-haired man, much less a direct dive attack. At first it seemed like a normal kick with his left leg as the attack to launch, but when he was 40 centimeters away from hitting that kick he quickly changed to a different kick style, hitting him full on with a spinning kick performed with both legs, hitting the blonde's skull in such a way that even when he was able to place his hands in between, the force was such that it sent him 2 meters away. The blow was quite good, and those who appreciated that attack immediately turned their gaze to Mina, who seemed to have a clear smile on her face while naturally supporting Midoriya, her best friend. That attack had been captured by the most intelligent, who were able to recognize it as a kick coming from copying a certain style. It was true Izuku had improved by now, not only throwing punches, but being able to throw kicks with impressive force, perhaps having a copied style but too effective, something that was demonstrated with that blow. Denki stood up effectively to attack immediately. He did not want to be defeated by such an opponent, so he put his hands together, creating a sort of yellow sphere that then disappeared, so he could stretch his left hand forward alone and form a gun sign and then act as if he were shooting. Exactly that had happened at an almost imperceptible speed. A strong discharge hit Midoriya's body, who could not react in time. The electricity itself was too fast and hardly visible if he was outside. The force of the shock numbed Izuku's muscles, as Kaminari had used a voltage similar to that of a taser to be able to cause a defeat to the boy in question, but it hadn't been as effective, fortunately, thanks to the green-haired boy's own demand on his body. Anyone would have fallen to the ground after such a shock, especially considering the shock and pain the green-haired man had to endure, who could now only remain slightly on his knees due to the force and the dizziness of such an attack. Izuku tried to get up as best he could, but his legs didn't respond properly. Even though his body was very well trained and could withstand greater energy loads like those of one for all in general by being concentrated throughout his body evenly, it wasn't enough for that attack to not cause him anything, but he did need a few seconds to recover. Kaminari felt he had won with that volley, so he tried to get as close to Deku as possible, kicking him in the face, something our boy couldn't avoid despite seeing it coming for obvious reasons. After landing a strong kick on the boy's face, a bit of discomfort could be noticed in the atmosphere because that kick was followed by a couple of fairly strong blows from the blonde, who seemed to be really focused on winning while the rest watched the scene with an air of dissatisfaction, although a few could feel that something bad was about to happen. The blows were more consecutive, jabs with both left and right and recklessly in Izuku's face, who due to the blows had a busted lip and a rather reddish left cheek, but nothing more than that. Aizawa had to be alert to see if Denki went too far with his fight. At the moment, he seemed to simply be looking to knock out the young shonen, who bravely continued watching him, waiting intently to act until the seconds he had to wait because his body couldn't move ran out, resulting in a forceful blow against the blonde's abdomen, who thought he had the fight in the bag. A brief smile could be seen on the green-haired boy's face after that successful impact. That blow was so strong that it managed to throw the blonde now quite far, leaving him 30 meters away, almost at the edge of the ring, while he rolled in an exaggerated way on the floor of the platform in question. Everyone watched the blow closely. It seemed like it had been performed with superhuman strength, It had to have been like that, therefore it only meant one thing. Before they could put the pieces together, a rather loud and tense metallic sound was heard, one that left everyone even more speechless. Midoriya was standing, but not as usual. You could notice a kind of aura of lightning surrounding him, as if his power had finally had a small presence, so much so that the metal platform under his feet began to break while making a strange sound, one that no one would have expected to hear. The pressure exerted by the green-haired man was immense, and when Kaminari barely got up due to the force of the blow, he could notice how his surroundings were quite destroyed, this because Izuku had been approaching him step by step, leaving everyone totally impressed by the events that took place. No one could respond to such events. Only Mina, with great joy, began to move her fists up and down as a sign that she had achieved it. She was showing what she was capable of, even though her rival was not the best. Seeing Midoriya surrounded by greenish rays while his determined gaze was focused on his opponent was something sublime to appreciate, especially for Jiro and Ishido, who couldn't look away for even a second since they thought they might miss something that would make them feel even happier. Deku didn't give the blonde any time to react, who desperately tried to finish standing up, something he hadn't completely achieved, and while doing so, he threw a few spheres towards the opponent. Evidently, each yellow sphere was charged with at least 1000 volts, enough power to knock him out and even cause more damage if more than one hit him. However, although Aizawa realized this and tried to interfere, he was stopped by a hollow sound, the sound of a sonic boom or something similar, as a curtain of air along with a shock wave were expelled from where Izuku was standing, pushing away those who were closest to the stage and preventing some from being able to stand due to the push caused. Midoriya dodged each sphere with agility and excessive speed. He seemed to almost go faster than the eyes of the vast majority, who only briefly appreciated some rays in different places and sometimes the aforementioned running around the track dodging each sphere until he was 1 meter from his opponent, a place where he was at his mercy, within his reach. Deku would finish the fight properly, giving him a blow, the necessary to end that encounter and not cause too much damage to the opponent. Denki could do nothing. His opponent's speed was more than terrifying. He was only using 10%. He had no chance to act, and it bothered him more than anything to lose against someone like him. Midoriya controlled his strength by decreasing the power of his left fist only until it reached 5%, which would be enough power of one for all to leave Kaminari out of the game. After having him 40 centimeters away, he lashed out with his closed fist in such a way that the blow was in a matter of less than a second against his rival, just centimeters from impacting his chest. But before impacting him, that memory returned to the boy's mind, bringing his insecurity just because of those words, bringing back his past because of that comment from the blonde towards him, as if he really knew what he was. Don't you feel bad that Jiro just used you? Bakugo isn't lying. You were a Deku and it only took her time to realize it. It's a matter of time before Mina does it too. One for All's control triggered, causing the percentage he had considered to impact to suddenly increase to 15%, the force necessary to perhaps break Kirishima's unbreakable form with just a direct impact, but for Denki, who did not have said hardening, it would be an unpleasant and quite powerful impact. Izuku couldn't do anything. His memory went back to the past, remembering the comments of the people who turned their backs on him or pointed their fingers at him as if he were just garbage, saying that he couldn't achieve his dream, hurting him, but more importantly his imagination raised the situation where Mina told him those words that ended up devastating him. Your friend. I'm sorry Midoriya, but you're just a Deku. I can't be friends with someone who can't even control their gift, The green-haired boy's mind clouded. Everything had happened in a matter of seconds. The boy's lost gaze changed to one with an almost frustrated expression while his fist sank into its target, causing the opponent's ribs to be shattered by the force of the impact, and the shockwave that followed sent the blonde into a tree, moving him exactly 50 meters away just by one blow. But before he shot out, he could notice those green eyes that clearly said, in the middle of such a dangerous and terrifying moment they only expressed a clear message, and then made him disappear among the trees and left him unconscious by the force of the attack. I am not a Deku. I will never be a Deku. To be continued. If you have watched till end, drop pink hearts in comments so I can know. I hope you guys enjoyed this video and make sure to like and subscribe to the channel. Now we will see you in the next video.